Survival myths that would actually get you killed. You and your best bro are sitting on the couch watching TV, bored out of your mind. You're flipping through the channels when you see somebody you recognize. It's the British guy who goes outside and drinks his own pee for fun. After watching him squeeze elephant poop into his mouth to drink water, you decide to go outside and test your survival capabilities, and also test how real common survival knowledge really is in practice. Because let's be real, whether you're an outdoorsy person or not, we've all heard survival tips at some point in our life. Are these tips that we've always just accepted as truth actually life-saving? Or could they potentially get you killed? And with you and your friends being inspired, you both pack your bags and head out the door for the adventure of a lifetime, not knowing whether or not this would be your last adventure. You were just dropped in an extremely remote location by a helicopter. And as you watch the helicopter fly off, you and your friend are now completely alone, left to your own devices, and your sole goal is to survive and make it home using only the knowledge that you've heard in passing. Before you and your friend can even take your first steps, you need to first understand what direction should you go. And before you could even think, your friend says, "Why don't we go north?" And while you agree, you have a question. How do we know which way is north? But luckily, everybody knows if you want to know which direction is north, all you have to do is find a tree with moss on it, because moss will only grow on the north side of the tree. So you and your friend begin walking until you notice a tree that has moss growing on the bottom of it. And as you approach the tree, that you can see that the moss is in your direction, meaning that if you just do a 180 and start turning around, you'll be going north. Although, just to be sure, you take a quick look around the tree and realize that there isn't only moss on the north side, there's moss on the north, south, east, and west side. This tree trunk is completely covered in moss, and it's not the only one. All of these tree trunks have moss all over them, meaning that you have no idea which way is north, and also debunking this myth that moss is somehow a compass. But this myth isn't just straight out of a fairy tale. There is some basis of reality here, although it's just not fully accurate or reliable at all. According to Michigan State University, it is more likely for moss to grow more prominently on the north side of trees and rocks, although moss can grow basically anywhere, meaning that if you are using moss to navigate, you are setting yourself up for failure, and in a survival situation, setting yourself up for your own possible demise. And while I like organic stuff as much as the next person, I'm gonna stick to my GPS, or at least my compass, when it comes to navigation. Feeling slightly foolish and a bit betrayed, you and your friend decide to confirm which direction is north with your compass and begin moving. So far, this walk is pleasant, and the forest that you guys are in is beautiful and lush, and the steps begin to fly by, and you and your friend are almost lost in conversation when your friend realizes something utterly terrifying. Because the vegetation on the ground is so lush, it's almost impossible to see what's lurking around your feet. And while your friend wasn't looking down, a venomous snake was able to slither onto his boot, up his pant leg, and wrap around your friend's thigh. But the snake didn't just end there. This snake, straight out of Data University, decided to bite your friend directly on the crotch. And by the time you even noticed the snake wrapped around your friend's leg, it was too late, and your friend was screaming in agony. Fortunately, you were able to quickly grab the snake and throw it off into the wilderness. But now you are left with a massive problem. Your friend has just been bitten by a venomous snake. But fortunately, he has a survival tip. It's common knowledge that when somebody receives a venomous snake bite, the best thing to do is immediately suck out the venom, right? It's only logical. The entry wound is still fresh. If you can pull the toxins directly out of the wound, you're only dealing with a small cut and not any venom being directly injected into your bloodstream. It's perfectly logical. And although the placement may be a bit unfortunate, you'd be willing to help your friend out if it was life or death. But in reality, this practice wouldn't be helpful at all. And here's how. Like I mentioned, it may seem initially logical that you would want to remove the venom by any means possible. And some people have even suggested that you should cut the injection site of the fang to make it bigger to be able to suck out more venom. But the reality is this. Once a snake has bitten its victim, there is no way for you to suck out any meaningful amount of venom. And if you were to cut the bite location, you would only be making the wound bigger, causing a higher chance of infection. Speaking of infection, putting your bacteria-ridden mouth on your friend's fresh wound is only going to increase the chances of introducing bacteria directly into your friend's fresh wound. And while it is possible to suck out a small amount of venom, it is not going to be a large enough amount to save your friend's life. However, it could be a large enough amount to cause yourself serious bodily harm or potentially even death as well. So yeah, even though your friend was extremely keen on you removing the venom out of his wound the good old-fashioned way, you luckily both had access to Google just for this brief amount of time, and you were able to confirm that this practice was outdated and potentially deadly and fatal to both of you. And the best course of action would be to limit your friend's mobility. This way, the venom would travel through your friend's body as slowly as possible, giving you the maximum amount of time to get antidote before things got fatal. However, due to plot armor, you had antidote on you and you were able to heal your friend without doing doing any sort of mouth-to-wound suction. After you administer the antidote and you allow your friend to bandage himself up, you both continue on your trek through the woods, feeling better and grateful to be alive, but also feeling more betrayed, because so far, everything you thought you knew was wrong. But before you and your friend could continue to complain about how crazy that entire ordeal was, you run into a much bigger problem. A 750-pound problem that's looking you right in the face. This problem is an adult, aggressive black bear. Your first instinct is to run the opposite way, but before you can even turn, your friend whips his arm around and clenches your arm tightly, holding you in your place. You look your friend in the eye and he tells you, "Are you crazy, man? We can't run away. We have to act like we're already dead." And with your friend's iron grip being on your arm, you have no other option but to lay down beside him. And now the both of you are laying on the ground with a 750-pound black bear slowly approaching your position. You and your friend at this point may be feeling like you just saved your lives. You outsmarted the black bear, and in a few minutes you'll be back well on your way. But in reality, you just made the black bear's life a lot easier and served him up 2 meals on a silver platter. I think most of us at some point have heard, if you see a bear, just play dead. But I think at this point, hopefully most people know that there is definitely some nuance to that. Specifically, that advice does not apply to all bears. Black bears, for example, do not take well to people playing dead. And this is exactly why the bear is currently shaking your friend in his mouth like a dog that just got a new chew toy. Black bears are notoriously aggressive, and if you encounter one, your best course of action is 1, slowly retreat if it doesn't notice you, but if it is fixated on you, your best next steps are to get as big and aggressive as possible. Obviously, you can't fight this bear, but you want to make this bear believe that it's not even worth fighting you. You want to extend your arms and legs outward, look big as possible, yell, sound aggressive, do anything to intimidate this bear, and if you're convincing enough, you may even scare the bear in this process. Grizzly bears, on the other hand, are a bit different. Experts say that grizzly bears respond better if you actually do lay down on the ground, although it's best if you protect your neck just in case and remain still until the bear checks you out and hopefully leaves you alone. And if you happen to end up in a situation where you're face to face with a polar bear, your best bet is to pray. Because polar bears are like black bears, but worse. They are the most aggressive and the most likely to tear your head off. So yeah, although the advice of playing dead around a bear isn't fully inaccurate, it, once again, definitely requires some additional context. The current popular saying is, if it's brown, lay down, if it's black, fight back, and if it's white, good night. Not because you're supposed to play dead, but because you're going to be dead. As you continue to lay motionless on the ground, you peek open one of your eyes to see what's going on. You notice that the black bear has dropped your friend and was distracted by something else, and luckily left you both alone. Your friend, while a little bit worse for wear, is still alive, and you help get him back on his feet, and you once again continue your journey. Feeling a bit bad for your friend, because at this point it looks like he survived 3 rounds with Mike Tyson, 4 days with Diddy, and 5 nights at Freddy's, you decide you would let him take a quick breather and go around gathering some food. Your friend sits down on a rock under a tree, and you decide to go and see what you can find. And once you begin wandering around looking, you realize one crucial thing. You have no idea what's edible or not, and you don't even know what's around you, but that doesn't stop you from looking. And quickly you find yourself approaching some interesting red mushrooms. Now, you know mushrooms can definitely be questionable, but the fact that you see a little snail munching away at these gives you hope. And as you pick these mushrooms, you notice that there's actually small bite marks from chipmunks. This gives you all the confidence you need to pick a few mushrooms and put them in your pocket and to continue scavenging. You continue looking around when you notice a small bush with inconspicuous red berries. You've never seen these berries before, but it doesn't mean that you can't eat them. And while you're cautious of these mysterious red berries, you notice a small bird fly down into this bush and carefully eat these berries before flying away. And once again, you rationalize with yourself, well, if this animal can eat this, obviously I can. If something was poisonous to them, they wouldn't eat it. So you go ahead and collect some of these berries as well. And you notice that you've been scavenging for hours, so you decide to return to your friend and show him your loot. Your friend doesn't seem too enthused by the small handful of random mushrooms and red berries, but something is better than nothing. And you and your friend begin to munch on the world's weirdest trail mix. Feeling energized from the food and also feeling energized mentally that you finally had some knowledge that was true, you and your friend both have a bit more of a pep in your step because you knew that you had at least some right information, right? That is until you realize your friend is looking in 2 directions and he is foaming at the mouth. In shock, you try to say something to him when all you can get out is a jumbled mess of slurred words, and you and your friend both pass out face down on the forest floor. The survival technique of eating what animals ate failed you both. And the reality is, animals are just better than you. And just because the animal can eat it doesn't mean you can eat it at all. Just think about it. Every animal has developed its own unique way of digestion, and the things that our bodies are able to safely process and consume typically come from thousands and thousands of years of consumption. And on top of this, some animals are just built different. Like cows, for example, they have 4 stomachs, and every animal processes the same foods differently. The bird that ate those red berries, for example, was able to pass the toxic seeds from those berries directly through its digestive system without any issues. And those seeds that are now a part of its excrement are now replanted and continuing the life cycle of those berries. But in your case, those seeds have been cracked open by your teeth and are now infecting your entire body with deadly toxins. And the chipmunk that was taking bites out of that small red mushroom has a specialized stomach acid that can neutralize the toxins within this deadly mushroom. However, you simply do not have the facilities to handle that. And the same mushroom that gives that chipmunk life gave you and your friend a near-death experience. Just because you saw an animal eating something does not mean it's not deadly for you. After a few hours being passed out on the floor, you and your friends slowly come to and pick yourselves up off the ground. Nonetheless, you and your friend decide it's time to get serious because the sun is soon setting and you guys need to eat food. You and your friend notice something fuzzy in the distance, and as you slowly approach it and peek over some bushes, you see a lonely old caribou walk slowly until it collapses right before your eyes. And while this is an unfortunate sight for you and your friend, this could be life or death. And in this instance, having an endless supply of high-quality food in front of you is something you and your friend couldn't have even imagined. You both approach the caribou to ensure that it's no longer with you. And once you have that confirmation, you begin to prepare the animal. Fortunately, for once, you were able to put useful knowledge to good use. And shortly after preparing the animal, you and your friend are sitting at a campfire under a tree, under the stars, eating your first meal in what feels like forever. But as good as having a hearty meal feels, and as confident as you feel knowing you have a nearly endless supply of food, the reality is that you're not set for food at all. And while you might not realize it now, in the near future, eating this food alone could easily kill you. And the reason is simple but interesting. And it all comes down to biology. Your body simply can't digest protein without fat. And if your diet only consists of protein with no other micronutrient, your body could literally starve or develop protein poisoning. The term for this situation is called rabbit starvation, or the French-Canadian term caribou sickness, but they both refer to the protein poisoning I just mentioned. But the reality is if you are only eating direct, big game, lean protein, you're setting yourself up for failure. And it's because of this very real caribou sickness that beavers were extremely valuable to North American indigenous people, because beavers had such high amounts of fat, which is why beaver hunting and trapping was so important, not just for pelts, but also for fat, so that this fat could be consumed, allowing your body to properly digest the protein from the big game you also caught. Black bears are also a great source of animal fats, although it's much easier to trap a beaver than a black bear, for reasons we discussed earlier. But yeah, if you tried to live solely off of a big game carcass, you would soon find yourself suffering from a strange form of starvation, simply because your body needs protein, but it also needs other macronutrients to properly absorb and process this protein. Luckily for you and your friend, you're both blissfully ignorant to this fact, and you wouldn't be eating off this carcass for long enough to experience these symptoms. And after both of you have successfully filled your bellies, you decide that it's time to get some rest. You suggest to your friend that maybe you guys should build a quick shelter, just something to keep you guys safe. But your friend tells you that that's a waste of time and energy, and that you guys need to conserve your calories as much as possible right now. And you both simply lay down on the ground and close your eyes to sleep. But that sleep isn't peaceful at all. And only a few hours into your sleep, you wake up freezing cold, colder than the air temperature outside, and you're kind of at a loss. And the reason is rather simple. Laying directly on cold ground is a great way to rapidly reduce your body heat. Literally because the ground is stealing heat from your body and lowering your core body temperature, causing you to burn more calories to try to heat yourself back up, while also absorbing all of the extra heat that your body is generating. So in a cold environment like the one that you're in at night, you could not only lose body heat, but also experience hypothermia just by laying on the bare ground, which is why you'll see outdoorsy people swear by a ground mat. Consider it insulation to keep your body heat within you and not being stolen by the ground beneath you. And now that you understand that collecting debris to lay on is a worthy investment of calories, you quickly put together a bundle of grass and leaves to make something soft, but also to make something to insulate your body heat. And you make a makeshift mattress that's large enough for both you and your friend. And you roll your friend onto it, you lay beside him, conserving body heat, and you close your eyes and experience your first bit of rest. The following morning, you decide it's time to start your day and continue your adventure. You begin to inform your friend about last night's discovery and how sleeping on the ground is not okay. But before you can even finish making your point, your friend stops you and points ahead. Because what stands in your way is something you haven't noticed until now. A massive snow-capped mountain, and there's no way around it. You and your friend now need to begin hiking. Luckily, you and your friend are energized from a good night's sleep and at least some sort of food that doesn't almost kill you. And as you and your friend begin to climb through this mountain, the temperatures begin to get lower and lower. And it's at this point when you're able to make the point to your friend that body temperature is something you guys need to keep in mind in these survival situations. But as your friend brushes off your concern about body temperature, he tells you the only thing you guys should be concerned about right now is water. You begin to get nervous because now that you're halfway up this mountain and surrounded by snow, there's no water around you, but your friend laughs at you and reminds you that this snow is water. He grabs a handful of snow off the ground, which appears to be untouched, and begins to chow down on his solid water. And while to most this seems completely safe and logical, this is definitely not the most ideal way to consume water. The first risk that this poses is that this snow or ice could actually cause micro tears or cuts in your mouth, which could definitely cause problems down the line. But more importantly than that, consuming ice directly is a surefire way to lower your core body temperature, causing your body to work overtime to heat itself back up. Your friend may think that body temperature isn't an important ordeal, but you know that it's nothing to laugh at. And at this very moment, hypothermia is a much bigger risk to you than being dehydrated. But unfortunately, your friend is in a bit of a pickle. Because yeah, he was able to hydrate himself through all of the snow he just ate, but he's now shivering uncontrollably and he's hungrier than he was yesterday because his core body temperature has been lowered and his body is consuming as much calories as it can to heat itself back up. Now, you're thirsty as well, but you're not willing to go through that entire experience. And what you do is a lot more wise. You remember watching the Outdoor Boys YouTube channel, and luckily you had the same supplies that he did. You scoop up snow into some sort of metal tin, you put it over top of a propane heater, and you allow the snow to melt, and then you consume the pre-melted, ideally room temperature water, allowing your body to not have to reheat it once it's consumed. Your body can simply use it as is. And the benefit of using this method as well too, assuming you have access to some sort of heat source, is you can actually kill any bad bacteria. But assuming that's not a risk here, you're able to at least avoid the whole hypothermia your friend is now fighting. After this whole water debacle, you realize that your friend's only chance of regaining any sort of heat is by continuing to move. So you keep on your path going over the snow-capped mountain. Unfortunately, your friend is no longer shivering, but you and your friend are now facing a much different issue. You and your friend are now both sweating, which is good. Body heat at this point is not a concern at all. This shouldn't be an issue. And sure, you might smell a little bit later, but what is an issue is the base layer of what you and your friend are wearing. Before you even left, you and your friends were debating on whether or not you should wear your clothes in a certain order. And your friend, obviously being a bit more reckless, said it didn't matter at all. So he started by putting on a cotton undershirt, a cotton hoodie, and then put a jacket over top that was waterproof to help keep water out. You, on the other hand, wanting to be different, decided to wear a base layer that was more moisture wicking, but still followed that up with another hoodie and a waterproof jacket. Now here's the difference. While you and your friend are still sweating now, as soon as you guys stop and your body heat begins to go down, the sweat trapped in your clothes is going to be deadly. And if your base layer is made of cotton, that sweat isn't going anywhere anytime soon. And after hours of hiking, you and your friend decide to take a break, and you guys experience the effects of this firsthand. After only sitting for around 15 minutes, your friend is not only cold once again, but he is shivering worse than he was before. And like I mentioned, that's because now his cotton shirt is drenched with sweat. And when cotton gets wet, it loses its ability to insulate you, meaning that your friend has effectively put a cold conductor directly on his body, and also effectively removed a layer, making him at risk once again for hypothermia. Luckily for you, you unintentionally decided to dress and act appropriately. You didn't wear a cotton base layer, meaning that by the time you already sat down and relaxed, your shirt was slightly wet in your armpits, but the rest of your shirt was able to dry relatively quickly. And also, as you were hiking up the mountain, you decided to remove layers, allowing yourself to not get too hot or sweaty. And that is the reason why you're not experiencing hypothermia right now. Because as you can tell, getting sweaty in a cold survival situation could be life or death. And a good rule of thumb is, if it's cold enough to wear multiple layers, it's too cold to wear a cotton base layer or cotton at all. And while it may seem counterintuitive to remove layers when you're in a cold environment, if you are exerting energy and on the verge of sweating, it is best to remove these layers to prevent sweating as much as you can. As thick as your friend's plot armor is, he is struggling at this point, and still somehow alive. He is dealing once again with hypothermia, and you guys have no access to fire or anything to warm him up. Your friend randomly asks you if you have any alcohol on you, and coincidentally, you did. You had a small bottle of some pretty strong alcohol in your backpack, and you wondered why he wanted it. But before you could even ask him what he wanted it for, he grabbed the bottle out of your hands and chugged it. After wiping his mouth, he tells you that obviously drinking alcohol warms you up. It makes you feel warmer and increases your body temperature. And while I believe this is a myth we've all heard, it's been debunked numerous times, and it also is completely counterproductive. The origin of this myth is actually interesting and comes from a St. Bernard dog that was carrying a brandy flask around its neck, and this dog was savoring people that was buried in the French Alps. And unfortunately, this brandy may help you feel better, but definitely won't make you better. If you've experienced an alcoholic beverage, then you've probably noticed the sensation at some point of warmth. And this isn't because the alcohol is raising your body temperature, it's actually because the alcohol is making your blood vessels dilate, stimulating the nerve endings in your skin. But it doesn't actually increase your body temperature. And if you are in a cold environment that is specifically life or death, this dilation of the blood vessels will cause your body temperature to fall and likely cause you to die much faster than you would have if you just stayed sober. So although alcohol may give you the simulation of warming up and potentially take your mind off of the pain you're in, it's definitely not doing you any favors in the survival department. Realizing the severity of the situation, you come to the conclusion that you need to get out of this mountain quick. And while your friend is incapacitated and breaths away from death, you realize your best bet was to turn your friend into a toboggan and ride him down the mountain like Mrs. Kwan in the Cat in the Hat movie. And in only a few minutes, you went from the top of the snow-capped mountain to a place you weren't in yet. You weren't in the forest anymore. You were on a beach. And luckily, it was warm enough to help you and your friend feel better, and you noticed that you were on an ocean. And this ocean could be your ticket to freedom. With both you and your friend being on your last brain cells, you both intuitively build a raft with absolutely no plan of going anywhere and no knowledge on any sort of nautical construction. Regardless, you make a makeshift raft and set sail, hoping that maybe somebody on the water will see you and save you. After hours of sitting on your raft, you and your friend are once again hungry. And while your friend is still sobering up, you decide your best bet is to look for some fish. You take a dive off your raft and you find yourself surrounded by a school of fish, but you're unable to catch any. That is, when you look through the school of fish and notice that a large shadow is approaching you. This isn't a big fish. This is a shark. And it's coming directly for you. You have nanoseconds to try to decide what your next move would be. And the first thing that comes to mind is movies and TV shows showing you that if you punch a shark, you're gonna be all right. So quickly and intuitively, as the shark approaches you, you don't move out of the way, you simply assume a karate stance and prepare to punch the shark. Now here's the deal. If you were actually going to go through with this, there's two likely outcomes. The first is that you are able to successfully punch the shark and scare it away, similar to the black bear, making it seem like you're not worthy prey. But the more likely outcome is that you extend your arm and have your arm ripped off by a shark and then have the rest of your body consumed shortly after. Underwater, you have almost no strength whatsoever. Like, just try throwing a full force punch next time you're in a pool underwater. It's gonna do almost nothing. And besides this, sharks are ruthless killing machines. Even if you could throw your strongest punch at a shark, it's not going to be phased. Combine that with your lack of agility in the water and the shark's endless agility in the water, your strike effectiveness in even misdirecting the shark is extremely low. If a shark was in your area, you could easily push it out of your way or misdirect it by pushing its head if you had the leverage to do so, but even that is potentially risky. But in the situation when a shark is coming at you with the intent of damage, your best bet is to attack sensitive areas, specifically by plunging your thumb into the shark's eye or gills. Really, the only two areas where you can cause significant damage and at least make the shark retreat temporarily. And so, in a last-minute split decision, you decide not to punch the shark, but to actually poke it in the eye, causing the shark to cry and turn around, leaving you alone, and giving you the chance to climb back on the raft with your friend. At this point, you and your friend have been through hell and back. Your friend more so than you, but you are both now laying on your back, looking up at the sky, exhausted. And at this point, accepting your fate and understanding that maybe this trip was a mistake. And as you slowly close your eyes and take what appear to be your last few breaths, you notice a white light appear in your vision. A light that is so bright and so inviting. And you hear a noise, an almost angelic noise. And before you get the chance to meet your maker, you are hit in the testicles by a rope ladder that was dropped on your raft. And you realize that this light was a spotlight from the same helicopter that dropped you off. And while the pain you are experiencing is unbearable, you realize that you and your friend are finally saved. You both climb the ladder and board the helicopter and feel like you have been given a second chance at life. As you both are flying home with the crew, the pilot asks you how your trip was and if you guys were able to enjoy the park that they left you in only a few miles out of town. And you and your friend look at each other and decide that it's better if you kept your stories to yourself and just told them you guys had fun, but that you wouldn't be returning anytime soon. The craziest cave rescue missions ever. If you're anything like me, then you guys have spent a lot of time at 2 a.m. watching YouTube. And for some reason, we all end up in the same rabbit hole, watching those insane caving videos. You know, the guys with loving families at home who just decide that they need to shove themselves through 2-inch cracks, 100 feet under the ground, while half underwater and covered in spiders. And at this point, it's even a meme to make fun of these crazy cave people. All over TikTok, people are just putting shoes over cracks and being like, oh, look at me, I'm a caver, which is honestly hilarious. But But in this video, we're going deep. No pun intended. Today, we are discussing rescue missions. But I'm putting a twist on this video. These rescue missions could either be successful or unsuccessful, and you won't know the outcome until the end of the story. So buckle up and don't get too attached to the characters in these stories. Let's begin. Thunder Canyon. This story gets seriously intense and involves a software engineer who went on a cave expedition with an experienced group and ended up fighting for his life. Brent Colvin is a 39-year-old software engineer from Valley Center, California. And due to the fact that he was an engineer, he was a very meticulous planner, especially when it came to planning unique adventures. And his trip to Thunder Canyon was no different. It's important to note that Brent is not an unexperienced caver and has been caving for years and is considered by many an intermediate to advanced caver. And the group of cavers he was about to embark on this expedition on were even more experienced than him. Thunder Canyon is a legendary cave for a few reasons. For starters, it's extremely elusive and is not marked anywhere, and it's only known within the caving community. And even learning the coordinates or general location of this cave system is more or less of a privilege. That aura for a lot of cavers already is so enticing, but it doesn't end there. The cave itself is dynamic. It's deep, dark, open in some places, wet in some places, tight in some places, and it almost sounds like I'm not describing a cave, but trust me, I am. Personally, it's hard to imagine a cave seeming enticing. However, if caving is your thing, Thunder Canyon had everything you wanted. It was rare, unique, and there was also many ways to approach it, as there was multiple entrances and exits that have been mapped out by other cavers. On Sunday, May 3rd, 2010, Brian and 6 other experienced cavers found themselves en route to Thunder Canyon, which included a short drive down an abandoned dirt road, and then from there a 2-mile hike to even get close to one of the elusive entrances to Thunder Canyon. After doing some searching, they find one of the entrances at 11 a.m. and the excursion begins. Upon entering this cave, they descend, and shortly after, without a hitch, the entire team clears the first obstacle. However, after this first rappel was a much larger task. It was an 80-foot drop. Now, it's important to note that this isn't just a rappel either. This rappel is a descent into darkness, going through a literal underground waterfall that lands you into a underground puddle of almost freezing cold water. But for cavers, this is all part of the thrill. The guide, Luca, is the first to rappel, and shortly after, the other cavers rappel as well, until they are all safely at their first checkpoint. At this point, it was obvious that some of the cavers were already feeling the pressure of what this cave was about to bring, and the guide even gave everybody an out, saying it's only going to get worse from here, and if you want to get out now. There was about to be tight squeezes, it's only going to get colder, and the trip has just begun. But even with some unsure faces, everybody continued on the journey. After completing a few rooms and rappelling twice more, the group meets their first fissure, aka one of these claustrophobic holes, which was literally named the Terrible Traverse. And it's called that because it takes a right angle into a 9-inch wide crack. A gap so tight that you can't even turn your head. And not only is it tight, the gap is also deep. 200 feet deep from top to bottom. It's important to note that the group reached this fissure at 3 p.m., 4 hours into their caving journey. And this fissure was one of the last things standing in their way before they were at the exit of the planned route. And it was, of course, at this fissure where everything was going to take a terrible turn. The guide of this expedition goes through this crack first, without a hitch. He's done it many times. Next up, one of the least experienced cavers goes through this gap, and he, unfortunately, gets stuck. And not only does he get stuck, but he panics. He had never been pinned like this before and was freaking out, and none of the other cavers were going to be able to help him until he calmed down. However, within 5 minutes, the guide was able to calm him down, and within 10 minutes, the guide and the other cavers were able to pull him through and assist him out of the cave. After that slight hiccup, 3 other cavers in your party make it through this fissure, and it's at that point when the guide takes all of the other cavers out of the group, leaving Brent to cross this fissure all by himself. A reasonable decision because Brent was an experienced caver and had experience in this specific cave. However, Brent hadn't experienced the Terrible Traverse, and this experience would be one that he would never forget. It's important to note that Brent was very nervous about trying this gap, and he didn't even know that the guide had left with the other cavers. So it was simply just Brent and his final buddy behind him in the cave. Regardless, Brent began moving through the Terrible Traverse. One of the biggest challenges associated with this fissure is the fact that you're not just walking through a gap or crawling through a gap. You have to move feet first down the length of the crack, and then angle your body sideways to shimmy along before dropping down a 5-foot gap where you could then get your footing and squeeze through to the exit. Just to be extra cautious, Brent removed his wetsuit to ensure he had as much space as possible. However, after inserting his body fully into this fissure, he was almost instantly stuck. He could feel the tension of the rocks on his chest. His hips were wedged between the walls, and the only thing supporting his body was his hand. He couldn't move in any direction, and it was at that point when he realized he was stuck. After being stuck for what felt like an eternity, the guide returned, only to notice Brent was stuck. And after 2 hours of their best efforts, Brent was no closer to being free and was actually beginning to slip deeper and deeper down this fissure. Due to the stress of believing that he would not make it out alive, Brent became rather lucid. In the final caver behind him, James was simply telling him stories to try to keep him awake and conscious. And it wasn't until 6:40 p.m., almost 4 hours later, that the San Bernardino Mountain Rescue Team was actually notified and mobilized to the position. After 7 hours of Brent being stuck, the guide was signaling to a rescue helicopter that was sent, as the initial rescue team that showed up was simply not equipped to help Brent. And although the helicopter spotted them and help was on the way, it took an additional 4 hours for the helicopter to find a safe place to land and the specialized team to get on site. At this point, there was a very real risk of hypothermia for Brent and compartment syndrome, which is essentially when your chest is compressed for a long period of time, exposing you to the risk of cardiac arrest. Brent dying in his stuck position was a very real situation, and was only becoming more and more likely as more time passed. Once the rescue team finally was able to reach Brent within the cave, they explained exactly how severe the situation was, and their first order of business was keeping him as warm as possible, as he had no wetsuit on and his body was trapped between two rocks that were much colder than his body temperature, essentially drawing heat out of his body. The rescuers put heat packs around Brent and even gave him an electrolyte beverage. But with Brent and the final caver, at this point hypothermic, the rescuers had to move quick to save these individuals. As the rescue team began to attempt to move Brent, it was obvious that this was going to be a painful experience, as his ribs were tightly wedged between two rocks. As they began pulling at his feet, Brent was screaming in pain, and the rescue team even asked Brent if they should stop pulling him, and it's reported that Brent literally replied, "I don't care if you break my ribs, just get me out of here." The rescuers used as much leverage as possible to lift the wooden board that bridged the gap in this fissure that was supporting Brent, and they used anchors to try to lift his body to pull him out. And with many failed attempts, they were able to move him 1, 2, 3 inches until they had him in a spot where their only option was to begin pulling his feet and essentially yanking him out of this cave. Brent's condition deteriorated deeper and deeper, and at 3:40 a.m., nearly 15 hours after entering the cave, Brent was pulled free out of the cave and rescued. After Brent was led out of the cave, the final caver quickly squeezed through the fissure without an issue, and the entire team survived this expedition. And after everything was said and done, it took over 13 people to help rescue Brent. I thought I'd start this video on a happy note. Yeah, Brent survived, fortunately. But I could not imagine what that experience would be like. And truthfully, I don't even want to paint a picture because I don't even want to imagine it. Being stuck, sideways, dark, hypothermic, and lucid has to be just awful. And believe it or not, Brent promised himself that he would continue caving after this. Although he did say he would avoid tight squeezes, so at least there's that. At least he made it. But that might not be the case for this next story. The Peruvian Intimeche Cave. Cecilio Lopez Tercero is a lifelong caver and adventure lover, and whether it be a natural talent or simply because of his lifelong experience and fascination, Cecilio had a very particular skill for navigating caves and squeezing through extremely tight gaps, seemingly with ease and almost no fear. He is a respected cave explorer, and at the time of this story, he is considered a veteran caver. Cecilio was even a member of the Madrid Rescue Group, meaning that he was more qualified than anybody, not only to save people, but also to explore caves safely. He was one of Spain's most renowned rescuers and cavers. Cecilio was Spanish, but due to his unique skills, he was taken on expeditions around the world to navigate caves that no one else would dare, and to map out caves that no one else could. I think you guys get the idea. This guy was a pro. Cecilio had heard of this obscure and rare cave system in the mountains of Peru through some of his colleagues, and when he learned that there was a potential for there to be never-before-seen artifacts or structures, he was instantly on board, and the expedition was set. And Cecilio and 9 of his colleagues began their expedition into the Intimeche Cave in the Peruvian Andes. The Intimeche Cave was reported to be at least a mile long and at least 1,200 feet deep, and Cecilio was curious how much deeper and longer it was and what secrets were hidden down in the bottom of this cave. Like any professional, Cecilio studied meticulously, learning of all of the risks associated with this cave. With the expedition underway, Cecilio led his group of colleagues into this cave on a multi-day expedition. And the first few days went on without any issues. Notes were taken, beautiful sights were seen, and everything was going to plan. But as they got deeper and deeper into the cave, the squeezes only got tighter, and the map only got more vague. After multiple days in this cave, the challenging physical aspect was obvious and accounted for. But the mental aspect was starting to take a toll as well, as these people at this point had been in complete darkness for days, only seeing the light of their headlamp. And the cave that they are hundreds of feet into is completely silent, only broken by the sounds of water dripping. It wasn't until what would have been one of the last days of the expedition that tragedy struck, and it was during a rappel portion of the cave. Cecilio was about to descend a modest 15 meters into the next room, known as the 13 days room. And it was at this point, after the anchor was set and he began rappelling, that he heard a cracking noise. His anchor had failed, and Cecilio was in a free fall, falling 15 meters onto hard rock. Cecilio somehow avoided all of the razor-sharp rocks covering the floor of this room. However, he lied there motionless, in extreme pain, and with a suspected broken back. After regaining consciousness, Cecilio came to the harsh reality of his situation. He lied helpless, deep in a cave that was already in an extremely remote and treacherous location, 400 miles away from Lima, Peru. He knew he needed to be rescued, but he also knew it was not going to be easy. One of Cecilio's colleagues carefully climbed down to where Cecilio was to assess the situation and realized how grim it was. One of the cavers in this party left to get help, and the others stayed with Cecilio to help monitor his health. Fortunately, Cecilio survived a fall that could have easily been fatal for some. However, now he has to survive what would likely be the most grueling days of his life, as after he fell and sustained these injuries, it would take almost a week for rescue personnel to make it to where Cecilio was. Keep in mind, Cecilio was in a deep, remote cave, located on the top of a mountain, where the entrance of the cave was at over 10,000 feet in altitude. When this medical team finally was able to find the location of the cave, hike over 10,000 feet to the cave entrance, and then begin the wild journey to where Cecilio was in the bottom of this extremely advanced cave, they weren't even there to help him escape. They were simply there to provide comfort measures and assess his health. They built a makeshift base camp and began administering morphine to provide comfort to the injured man that the medical team didn't know if they'd be bringing out dead or alive. Because Cecilio was still alive, removing him was going to be an extremely complicated feat, and it couldn't simply drag him by his feet, and he, unable to feel his legs, was unable to help himself as well. The medical team brought a rigid stretcher that was specifically designed to help carefully drag Cecilio out without jolting or repositioning his body, risking injuring him even worse. With medical measures in place, it was up to the other cavers to request specialized help. And initially, the Spanish government was unwilling to send a rescue team, and then they turned to the Peruvian government, both of which denied to send help to save Cecilio's life. Cecilio's colleagues did the only thing they could do. They reached out to the Madrid Caving Society and also turned to social media, begging for support to help save their dear friend's life. They did everything they could to pressure the Spanish government into saving one of their most valuable cavers. Now, this is where things get interesting. Once some of Cecilio's friends from back home caught news of this, they immediately flew to Peru to help save them themselves. That is real friendship. And by the time these amazing friends were on the scene, there was already a small village at this cave entrance, consisting of medical staff, rescuers, and volunteers. Don't forget, this cave entrance is extremely remote and over 10,000 feet in altitude. It's not an easy place to be. And once again, keep in mind that this cave is extremely advanced, and many of the volunteers and rescue personnel that were dispatched are simply not equipped for this level of cave. And it would be only more of a liability for them to even attempt to save Cecilio. By the time that this rescue mission was fully underway, there was volunteer cave experts from Spain, France, Mexico, Peru, and over 40 Peruvian fighter fighters and military personnel actively involved in the rescue of Cecilio. And yet, there was still major challenges that took place. These 40 people need to eat, drink, they need to communicate with others, meaning that all of the progress that they're able to make is delayed significantly due to their lack of supplies, only adding more and more complexity to this seemingly impossible rescue mission. With this global team of experts on site ready to help Cecilio, they began the exploration into the cave. And once they reached Cecilio, they even explained their plan to him and got his professional insight on the escape that they had planned. And then they built a base camp 900 feet into the cave and began to set a complex series of anchor points across the entire cave so that they could essentially hoist the stretcher with Cecilio on it without him taking much more damage. On the 12th day, when they began drawing the stretcher out of the deep cave, things took a turn for the worse, as on this day, winds were higher than normal. The weather was unfavorable, and rain was adding an entirely new level of complexity into this rescue mission. Despite the heavy winds, a rescue helicopter was able to take the freshly rescued Cecilio to the nearest hospital, where he was treated, and after many months of treatment, he amazingly made a full recovery. The case of Cecilio Lopez is literally insane, and honestly a bit heartwarming to see how passionate people were about saving this man's life, likely because of all of the lives that Cecilio impacted during his time as a rescuer himself. If it wasn't for nearly 50 people from across the globe, not to mention local volunteers and villagers in the area, Cecilio would have never made it out of this cave and simply would have died. Call it luck or call it karma, Cecilio had something or somebody watching over him. Cecilio is a gangster, and the story is a clear example of how resilient the human body and mind can be. But we still have one more to discuss: the Chilean miner rescue. This rescue mission is by far the most intense we've talked about on this list, and is likely one of the most intense cave rescue missions ever conducted. As the title suggests, this rescue mission isn't of cavers who went down a deep, crazy, uncharted cave. This rescue mission is rescuing miners working in a gold and copper mine. And unfortunately, what started as a regular day on the job ended up becoming a multi-month global affair. Let me explain. On August 5th, 2010, 33 miners entered the San Jose cave in Chile. But that night, none of these miners leave that cave. The San Jose cave is over 100 years old and it stretches over 10 miles of confusing corridors. Some of these mine shafts go almost a mile deep into the ground. But for these miners, this was a normal day at work. And shortly after 2 a.m., a collapse had happened, leaving these miners trapped. The San Jose mine, which was owned by the San Esteban Mining Company, was known for its notoriously unsafe work conditions, and the company had reportedly even ignored warnings from the Chilean Safety Administration. And unfortunately, today was the day that what the Chilean government had warned about would happen. After hearing a huge rumbling noise and literally feeling the earth shake below them, these miners, unaware that they have just been trapped, decide that they should likely exit the cave to evaluate what just happened. And it's on their way out of the cave that these miners realize that there was collapse. And not only a small collapse, but a large collapse caused by a 45-story tall piece of diorite rock, blocking the only way in and out of the cave. This piece of diorite was almost 1,000,000 tons and fell directly onto the mine shaft. Fortunately, leaving the mine wasn't the only option for these miners, as near the very bottom of the mine was a man-made room known as the refuge. And after realizing that they weren't leaving this mine, all of the miners gathered up and made their way to the refuge. The refuge is exactly how it sounds. It's an emergency shelter area. Fresh air is strategically pumped into this room from the surface, and is also stocked with emergency food and medicine. This room was meant for this exact situation, and in this case is going to be the difference between life and death. Because the mine is so massive, men working near the very bottom of the cave still at this point were completely unaware of what happened, and one of the miners had to go down to inform them what had happened and bring them back up to the refuge. These 33 miners weren't just all mining together. They were all in different parts of the cave when this happened. However, they all survived the collapse, and it didn't take long for them to all be gathered up in the safest place in the cave. Some of the miners remembered that the ventilation system that pumps fresh air into different parts of the cave is, by regulation, supposed to be large enough to carry a person, and also should have a ladder inside for situations like this. Unfortunately, after further inspection, it was discovered that these ladders were never installed, and that these air pipes were simply useless for escape. And in their opinion, they have no way of contacting the surface, and at that point, things look grim. During this collapse, there was actually one miner who was in a part of the cave that was above where the collapse was, meaning that he was able to escape. Making his way through ash and rubble, he was able to tell the site supervisors exactly what happened and begin what would end up being a multi-month-long rescue mission. Due to the remote nature of this cave and the lack of any cell service, it took over 5 hours from the collapse happening for any authorities to even be notified of the situation. Unlike the last one, the government was willing to help these people, and they sent a specialized team down the mine shaft to see exactly what was going on. The specialized team decided to take the ventilation shafts down into the mine because they are able to rappel down and do not require a ladder. Although roughly halfway down this ventilation shaft, it is made very obvious that these ventilation shafts were unstable due to the collapse and that they would not be a method of rescue. And on their way back up, some rescuers were almost lost in another smaller collapse that took place within one of the ventilation shafts. And those on the surface still don't even know if the people in the cave are alive or not. After the miners returned to the refuge with grim news about the ventilation shaft, the group of miners begin to plan for the worst. And it's at that point when they begin rationing the very small amount of supplies they have, and also begin to set out a routine, as these experienced miners understand that this rescue, if at all possible, will not take days, but likely weeks or longer. While it may seem like these miners are creating their own little community underground, kind of like a fallout shelter, an entirely new city is popping up on the surface of this mine, consisting of concerned citizens, volunteers, and most importantly, family members of those stuck in the mine. After days being stuck in this mine, the miners are unsure if anybody is ever going to come save them, until a noise is heard, a faint drilling noise from above. and they realize that help is on the way and that somebody is drilling into the mountain. The team drilling above correctly assume that the surviving miners are going to be residing in the refuge, and it's for that reason that they aim a drill from the surface directly to the refuge. And a new challenge appears, accurately setting up the drill to ensure that it reaches the refuge, because even being a percentage of a percent off on the surface, by the time they reach the depth of the refuge could be multiple feet off, meaning that they need to completely reset and re-drill once again. To ensure that this rescue mission goes as smoothly as possible, the Chilean government not only acquires the support of other larger mine rescue teams, but also contacts NASA for consultation to ensure that they are taking the best possible course of action. While a team of experts is ensuring that the drill is put in the perfect position, another group of rescuers try accessing the ventilation shafts once again to ensure that they are completely impossible to save the miners. And unfortunately, it's confirmed. And not only did they confirm that the ventilation shafts are useless, they also confirmed that the diorite rock is still moving. Meaning that not only was there a large cavern that the diorite rock fell from, creating a ton of unstable ground in the cavity that it left, but it also means that this large rock that is now blocking the path is also still unstable and moving, while only slightly. Unfortunately, the drilling isn't going much better. And at this point, the drill has bent and broken multiple times, and the rescue holes that they've started have been abandoned twice. And due to the discovery of the diorite rock moving, the primary entrance of the cave has been closed and sealed forever. Now meaning that the only way of saving these miners is by successfully digging a 2,000-foot hole that spans from the surface perfectly into the refuge without collapsing. At this point in the story, we are 14 days into these 33 men being trapped underground, and we are still only just getting started. The head of this rescue mission made an executive decision. They are not going to drill faster, but they're going to drill slower. They begin re-drilling, but turn the drill to half speed to ensure that the drill does not malfunction or break course, as accuracy in this situation is paramount. It's already been proven that trying to rush this drilling would only take longer due to all the possible and likely failures. And it's at this point when things get crazy. 17 days since the collapse, the slow drilling procedure has been semi-successful. And while the drill breaks through into something, they don't know what they had broken through to. And as they remove the drill to insert a camera to inspect where the drill ended up, they noticed that the drill had something attached to it. There was a note attached to it. A note from the miners below. They had contacted them. And to those above, this was the first confirmation that there was any living miners stuck in this cave. The letter described exactly where the drill had broken through in the mine, and also was a personal letter to members of the family from the miners, as they were still completely unsure if their fate was sealed or not. The last thing written on the note is the most important of all. It is a simple confirmation that all 33 miners are alive and well. And this brings the morale of all rescuers to an all-time high. But the job is still not over yet. Like, just think about it. Imagine 17 days ago, over 2 weeks ago, you are told that your family is dead in a mine and that your father, brother, uncle, cousin was in a gold mine that collapsed and that they are dead. And if the collapse didn't kill them, then being underground for 17 days definitely did. But then all of a sudden getting confirmation that not only your loved one, but everybody's loved one is alive in this mine. That has got to be the most intense roller coaster of emotions. Now that they have a hole that goes directly to the refuge, they drill 2 more. One for supplies and one that is intended to be used for rescue. The miners underground now have communication to the surface through a phone that was dropped down one of the supply holes. They have food, medicine, and water provided to them through one of these holes. And while things look amazing, they are still trapped underground. From day 17 till day 65, drilling continues to make a large enough hole to take people out of the refuge, and development continues on a pod that will be sent down this hole and retrieve these people. Essentially an elevator-like tube that can take one person at a time in and out of the cave. And on day 65, both of these new tools are put into place. There is a hole that is wide enough to take people in and out of the refuge, and an experimental device created by the Chilean Navy with support from NASA is ready to be tested. It's a metal tube that can be dropped and retrieved out of the cave, and it's now officially going to begin its first test run. A rescuer bravely enters this pod and descends down into the mine. Unsure if this pod will even make it down to the bottom of the mine safely, or even if it does make it safely, if it's able to go back up. However, a rescuer is required to descend with the pod to give proper instructions on how to safely use it and to give some support to those who have been underground at this point for 65 days. The first miner, who is already pre-selected by the group, enters the pod and makes his 15-minute journey up through the pod, and without a hitch, makes it to the surface successfully and safely. The first of these 33 miners to see the surface for over 2 months. Throughout the night, all 33 of these men were taken to the surface safely, where thousands of people stood by for the rescue and millions of people were watching worldwide on TV as this rescue was broadcasted globally. All of these men were deemed in good physical condition, and they were all instructed to wear sunglasses because they had been in essentially darkness for 2 months, and the sunlight could be harsh on their eyes. All of the men visited the hospital to ensure their vitals, and only 2 of them weren't instantly released. The 2 that weren't instantly released required either dental or some psychological help, both of which had those addressed successfully as well. This entire rescue mission was insane, and the fact that these men were able to survive for so long proves their mental and physical resilience. And I cannot imagine the feeling of finally reaching the surface after over 2 months underground to see so many people screaming and cheering and celebrating the success of your rescue. This entire rescue mission cost over $20 million, with the majority of that money coming from private donations. The story, once again, is such a heartwarming example of communities and people coming together to save those in need. And I really wanted to highlight that element specifically in this video, because a lot of videos on these topics don't do that. They focus on the negative, which I get. And I guess if you want your little bit of negativity, here's something that'll piss you off. Investigations that took place after the rescuers were saved determined that there was no criminal charges responsible to the mining company for this collapse that happened, even though it was known for its unsafe conditions. And while that's an entirely different story for a different video, it's something to ponder on. Many of these men were giving donations and gifts from wealthy people who sympathized with their situation, but these gifts did not allow them to retire, and these men had to make a living, most of them returning to mining, believe it or not. And I knew I had to add it on this list of crazy and insane rescue missions. And I think it goes to show, with enough media attention to get enough people and the right people involved, almost anything is possible. Things that got banned because one person ruined it for everyone. Last meal larceny. It's no secret that even the worst people on this earth still get the opportunity to have a nice meal before they go. The American tradition of offering a last meal to people on death row has been going on for a long time. However, did you know that in most prisons, last meals are not nearly as customizable or as extravagant as they once were? Let me explain. Now, the tradition of a death row last meal is definitely most common in the United States. However, this tradition is actually rather old, predating both the United States itself as well as the entire Christian religion. You see, for thousands of years, across almost every culture in the entire world, it was customary to give those a last meal who were set for death. The reasoning for this in ancient times was rooted in fear, specifically the fear that the spirits of the executed would come back as hungry ghosts if the deceased individual was not properly fed before their execution. That alone is kind of hilarious, considering they are more scared that they will come back to haunt them because they were well fed, rather than, literally executed. But regardless, it's made its way through history in different civilizations and empires until it got to the modern day. For example, the Greeks would give their soon-to-be executed prisoners a final meal because they believed it was necessary for the dead to cross over into the underworld. And because they didn't want these individuals to return to haunt the overworld, they would give them a proper meal. And not too differently, in ancient Rome, they would give not only their criminals, but also gladiators large meals before the days of their fights in case they happened to have an injury or death during the games, ensuring that they crossed over to the other side without fault. And already, it's kind of seeming like the ticket to heaven is, well, a good meal. Now, focusing back in on the United States, for example, the last meal tradition made its way into the American prison system in the early 1800s. However, this practice was finally formalized by several states in the early 1900s, with different states having their own rules, with Texas being a notable example, specifically because in every state the rules varied on what the meal could be. Most states that offered a custom last meal had certain rules. For example, in Florida, your meal could be whatever you wanted as long as the ingredients were purchased locally and didn't cost more than $40. And in Oklahoma, for example, the cost limit is only $25. And in Louisiana, of all places, typically during the last meal, the prison warden will join the prisoner for this last meal, which I could only imagine is a tense dinner. But interestingly, out of all of the places that offered a last meal, Texas was notable for being one of the most generous. Prisons would typically offer large requests, not setting extremely harsh budgets on the food. This, I'm sure, was appreciated by inmates on death row. However, it didn't take long for Texas to go from being a generous state to being a state that didn't offer custom last meals at all. And the reason why the state of Texas changed this rule is because of one individual. Lawrence Brewer, like basically everybody on death row, was not a good person. But Lawrence Brewer specifically was notably bad. Without getting too much into graphic detail, the reason why Lawrence Brewer was on death row was because him and 2 other individuals pulled a man named James Byrd Jr. from the back of their truck after brutally assaulting him, dragging him to his death simply because of his skin color. This hate crime and murder fortunately was punished to the fullest degree, although it's extremely disgusting that it even happened in the first place. With that being said, even though Lawrence was on death row, he was still honored a last meal. And for this meal, he requested something extravagant. And the order goes as follows: 2 fried chicken steaks, a triple patty bacon cheeseburger, a cheese omelet, a bowl of fried okra, a pound of barbecued meat, 3 fajitas, a meat lover's pizza, a pint of ice cream, a slab of peanut butter fudge, and 3 root beers. Surprisingly, the Texas prison system generously honored this rather extravagant request. However, in retaliation, once Lawrence was presented with this food, he didn't take a single bite. He pushed the plates away and simply said, "I'm not hungry." After it became obvious to the prison guards that he was not going to eat, he was taken back to his cell and the food was, I'm assuming, thrown away or potentially eaten by some very hungry prison guards. And if that was the case, honestly, I'm just glad it didn't go to waste. Unsurprisingly, once the news broke that not only was this disgusting inmate offered such a generous meal, but he didn't even touch a single bite of it, it didn't only make headlines, but it boiled the blood of prison officials in Texas. And it was because of this stunt by Lawrence Brewer that the Texas prison system instantly changed the rules, no longer offering any custom meals to anybody on death row. From when this happened in 2013 until the present day, if you are set for execution in Texas, your final meal is no longer whatever you want. It's whatever the cafeteria has that day. And while this isn't really the most upsetting story considering who this affects, people literally being killed by the government because what they did was so horrible, but it is still a pretty interesting example of one person ruining the last piece of fun people on death row could have. This may seem like a tame start because it literally only affects inmates on death row. And you're right, and that's because this video is only going to get more and more crazy as it goes on. And by crazy, I mean affects more and more people. So let's move on. The touchdown shutdown. I love sports. They're fun to play, they're fun to watch, they're fun to learn about. All around, sports are just a great thing that bring people together. But admittedly, I'm not the biggest fan of professional sports. I just don't watch it a lot. But when I do watch professional sports, one of my favorite parts of it are the extracurriculars. Fights in hockey, trash talk in the NBA, the hilarious flops in soccer, halftime shows, and of course, touchdown celebrations. But did you know that in American football specifically, there was a touchdown celebration that was so prolific that it actually got banned from the entire NFL? Well, if you do, you're gonna hear about it again. But if you didn't, let me tell you a crazy story. If you're a fan of American football, then the name Jimmy Graham is probably not unknown to you. Jimmy was born in 1986 in Goldsboro, North Carolina, and was drafted into the NFL in 2010 by the New Orleans Saints. Throughout his career, Jimmy played for the New Orleans Saints, the Seattle Seahawks, the Green Bay Packers, and even the Chicago Bears. And during his football career, he was not only known for his athletic ability, but also his unique touchdown celebration, with the most iconic being his football dunk on the goalpost. In case you're unfamiliar, almost every time Jimmy would get a touchdown, he would literally take the ball, run it to the goalpost, and dunk it over the post, essentially like he was dunking a basketball. This, admittedly, was pretty badass looking, although it came with consequences because he was doing it so much, and it looked so cool that the NFL decided that no one man could have all that aura. I'm totally lying. If you look at this clip right here, you can see that after he dunks the ball, he literally bent the goalpost. And this wasn't an uncommon occurrence. Obviously, when one of the most foundational components of a sports field is, well, broken or at least misaligned, it has to be fixed instantly for the games to continue. And in the case of the goalpost being fixed after a dunk, these fixes were known to pause the game for anywhere from 2 to 20 minutes. And while these delays may seem minor, when you're talking about professional, live, televised sports, anything that throws off the schedule to that degree that isn't planned for is a major headache for networks, advertisers, and the league in general. It was for this destructive reason that the NFL ended up banning the dunk on the field goal, which in my opinion kind of solidified this move as one of the coolest touchdown celebrations ever, even though it was pretty disruptive and I'm sure really annoying for people actually working the game, and probably even watching too. And while this is once again more of a niche rule that doesn't affect too many people, I would definitely argue it at least affects more people and likely also had a trickle-down effect. Because imagine if you were growing up watching Jimmy Graham play football and your goal was to grow up playing the NFL and dunk yourself. If that was your goal in life and then you heard that dunking was banned, you probably just had one of your biggest dreams crushed. And while sure, you could probably dunk in amateur leagues, if the goalpost is being bent in the NFL, I can only imagine what would happen if you're dunking on amateur league nets. And I wouldn't be surprised if people dunking at home injured themselves or broke goalposts altogether. But yeah, Jimmy Graham not only made his own touchdown celebration, but used it so much he got it banned. And And well, the rest is history. The sushi situation. I've never been to Japan, but it's definitely extremely high on my bucket list of places I want to go. The culture is so cool, the landscapes are beautiful, and the technology is just interesting. Obviously, here in the Western world, we enjoy a lot of Japanese technology, but over in Japan, they're still gatekeeping some of their coolest stuff for themselves. Most notably, in my opinion, the food conveyor belt. Honestly, I couldn't even tell you where I first saw or heard of this, but I just remember seeing people sitting at a restaurant and food coming to them on a conveyor belt and just being so enamored by it. Initially, I questioned why Golden Corral didn't get this instantly, but then I thought to myself, well, if Golden Corral had this, they would probably have to install wider doors so people could leave. But focusing back on the point, these food conveyor belts are relatively popular across Japan. However, in one popular sushi chain in the Gifu Prefecture in Japan, the conveyor belt was not only cancelled but replaced with a cartoon version, all because of the acts of one individual. It was a regular day near the beginning of 2023. People were enjoying their food at the Shushiro restaurant in Japan. This restaurant obviously was known for its conveyor belt system. However, on this now infamous day, a 17-year-old boy walked into the Sushiro restaurant and sat at a table. During his stay, he had the very dull idea to film himself licking soy sauce bottles and teacups and even sushi and putting them back on plates, sending them down the conveyor belt for other people to have. Now, this disgusting video went viral, and seemingly overnight, this video had over 40 million views and was being posted on news outlets everywhere, seemingly exposing the vulnerability of this honor-based system. You know, having the honor to not mess with other people's food. To some, this instance may be considered a prank. However, the Japanese government and the restaurant chain did not see it that way at all. And this incident was actually dubbed sushi terrorism because of how seriously it was taken by Japanese officials. Because of the widespread outrage that was caused by this viral video, action was taken by both the police and the company that owned Shushiro. The boy that did this food licking was arrested, but on top of being arrested by the police, he was also sued by Shushiro for over $480,000 in damages. And while being sued for nearly $500,000 may seem steep for licking some food, you have to understand that A, that's unacceptable and just disgusting and could be a health hazard if this individual, had diseases. But even still, this video going viral was detrimental for the restaurant itself and ended up causing the Shushiro restaurant chain nearly 16 billion yen in market value, simply because people saw this video, got grossed out, and decided they wouldn't be returning anytime soon. But not only did the company lose money because people were simply not going, the stock value of this company also dropped massively because investors were speculative about how the company can recover from such a PR disaster. And because the stock for the parent company that owned Shushiro tanked, Shushiro acted quickly and seemingly overnight replaced all of their real conveyor belts with real food with digital conveyor belts that had digital food that you can click on to order foods, but gone were the days where real food would just pass you by. And honestly, it's unfortunate that, well, one person ruined it for everybody. Although there is an argument to be made that while this dumb prank was disgusting, it also did expose a vulnerability that could have had worse consequences if somebody more devious wanted to expose it. But what do you guys think? Feel free to pause quickly and comment, but I'm gonna move on. The Tylenol tragedy. If you're somebody with an active Netflix subscription and a fan of true crime, then you very likely saw the documentary recently released about the Tylenol murders. This documentary was both interesting and also shocking, because as somebody who was born nearly 20 years after the Tylenol murder event took place, it's really quite crazy to try to imagine what a medicine bottle would look like without tamper-proof protection. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what the Tylenol murders are, they're actually rather mysterious. And to sum it up rather briefly, from September to October in 1982, there was a string of at least 7 deaths that were attributed to a mass poisoning of Tylenol extra-strength pills. This event was extremely unfortunate and killed both men, women, and children. And one of the saddest parts about this entire situation is that not only was nobody ever caught and convicted for this mass poisoning due to the fact that it made major headlines, also inspired other lunatics to poison other medicine bottles across the country. That's about all the detail I'm going to go into in regards to the murder specifically, primarily because next week I'm posting my part 2 to my Killers on the Loose video. And all I'm going to say is the Tylenol murders may make an appearance on that list. So if you're waiting for part 2 to my now fastest growing video, well, tune in next week. But focusing back in on the aftermath of this extremely upsetting situation. What happened and what did somebody ruin for everybody? Well, as I mentioned earlier, when these murders took place in 1982, medicine bottles had nowhere near the precautions they have today, largely because of this event. But the aftermath of these murders wasn't just 7 innocent people dead and Tylenol now having to put a few extra steps in the process of opening a bottle. As I already stated, when this story hit the mainstream, it not only inspired copycats, but terrorized the entire nation, as now anything seemed like it could have been potentially contaminated. And if you're somebody who experiences contamination OCD, I can only imagine that this would be a living nightmare. During the time that these murders took took place, Tylenol had a 35% market share when it comes to over-the-counter pain medication. But after the murders took place, that market share dropped from 35% to 8%. And it took a lot of action from Tylenol to rebuild that trust among the community. And while these murders were undoubtedly tragic, there was at least a positive outcome out of these nearly unthinkable actions. That positive outcome, of course, being A, accountability from pharmaceutical companies, and also widespread reform. For example, as soon as this crisis took place, Johnson & Johnson, the company that owns Tylenol, issued a massive recall, essentially taking over $100 million worth of product off shelves across the nation. On top of this, Johnson & Johnson established a strong relationship with the Chicago Police Department, where the murders took place, to further be involved in the investigation. And on top of this, they also formed stronger bonds with the FBI and the FDA. All of these relationships were formed with the hope of finding the person who laced the Tylenol tablets that ended up killing innocent people. But of course, the most notable outcome that came out of this entire tragedy was the development and implementation of tamper-resistant packaging, most notably being induction seals. You know, the things that are really annoying to peel off every time you open basically anything nowadays. This tamper-resistant packaging became more or less of an industry standard, and that is a genuinely positive outcome, although it's upsetting that it took such tragedy for this seemingly simple implementation to be, well, implemented. But that's just on the Johnson & Johnson side. On the governmental side, product tampering was made an official crime to further prevent any actions even remotely similar to the Tylenol murders. And on top of both of these beneficial changes, the FDA also introduced more stringent regulations when it comes to filled capsules instead of powder-pressed tablets to help further prevent product tampering. And it was with all of these positive changes, and I'm sure millions, if not billions spent in PR, Tylenol's market share was able to return in only a year's time, which is rather impressive. But to circle this back to the entire point of this video, things that got banned because one person ruined it, let's dissect this a bit. What was technically banned in this situation? Well, I guess product tampering and, well, unsealed pill bottles. And while those are things that are definitely not beneficial, the reason why I wanted to talk about this specifically was because, well, nothing was really banned per se besides things that already should have been banned, but I wanted to talk about it because one person definitely ruined something for everybody. That being basically the trust of people to not mess with products on shelves, causing almost everything nowadays to be sealed for your safety. Or at least that's what they say. And ultimately, I do think this was a beneficial change, although it is kind of upsetting why it is required. But just so this video technically fits the theme, the thing that was banned was, yeah, you can't sell pharmaceuticals without having a tamper-proof seal. But in case you want more of an example of ruining for everybody, although it wasn't banned, in that Halloween that followed the Tylenol murders in October of 1982, because people were so paranoid about the recently poisoned Tylenol, people were extremely suspicious of poisoned candy, which is why in Halloween of 1982, it was reported that Halloween attendance across the country was at an all-time low. And grocery stores even reported that candy sales were down over 20% compared to previous years, which honestly, I believe is a valid fear. And is just another upsetting example of how one person's actions can affect, well, an entire nation. The mustache must go. I wish I had a better transition, but you know how I just talked about one person's actions affecting an entire country? Well, now we're going to discuss how one person's actions affected, well, the entire world. Look at this image right here. What is the first thing when you think of when you see this piece of facial hair? Did you say famous, beloved comedian Charlie Chaplin? Well, I'm sure a few of you little hipsters did, but I would say the overwhelming majority of you instantly thought of Adolf Hitler when you saw this mustache. And I would bet money that you don't even know the name of this mustache. If you ever had to refer to this mustache, you would call it a Hitler mustache, which just goes to prove how synonymous this mustache is with the evil dictator from Nazi Germany. The traditional name of this mustache is known as a toothbrush mustache, and it's a small, narrow style of mustache that just sits on the center of your upper lip. And as I mentioned, before it gained popularity in, well, politics, it was popular among normal people as well as comedy legends such as Charlie Chaplin and Oliver Hardy. But if you try to sport this mustache yourself, well, nobody's gonna say, hey, nice Charlie Chaplin mustache. And it was for this reason that this facial hair was more or less retired. Admittedly, the toothbrush mustache, at least to my knowledge, was never formally outright banned, at least legally. But I would definitely say socially, this mustache was definitely banned, although that doesn't mean that there was attempts to bring it back. Probably the most infamous example of somebody sporting a toothbrush mustache in the more modern era is Michael Jordan of all people. And you've just got to ask yourself, if anybody can bring back a piece of culturally banned facial hair, it has to be basketball legend Michael Jordan, right? But unfortunately, even he was not powerful enough to overcome the stigma of the mustache. And it was for this reason that even he himself faced controversy for sporting this mustache that, in my opinion, didn't really resemble a Hitler mustache too much because he also had a little bit of a goatee thing going on. And also there's some other glaring differences between him and Hitler. Mainly the haircut. I think it's just the haircut. But regardless, not only did he decide to have this mustache, but he also rocked it in a legit commercial. And I guess nobody on set just told him to not do that. But, you know, it's Michael Jordan in his prime. I wouldn't either. But yeah, even Michael Jordan couldn't have a mustache that even loosely resembled the toothbrush mustache simply because the stigma is just so bad. and I guess rightfully so. Although it is a bit unfortunate because the mustache didn't do anything. It was the man wearing the mustache. But in case something being socially banned isn't enough for you, well, there's also a plethora of things that are actually banned due to the actions of Adolf Hitler. One of the more interesting bans is the fact that several countries have actually outright banned naming yourself or your child Adolf Hitler. For example, in Germany, Malaysia, Mexico, and New Zealand, it is all illegal to be named Adolf Hitler, which I think is understandable. But I think potentially more interesting is that in some US states, it is also prohibited to be named Adolf, although this isn't federally enforced and it's on a state-by-state basis. And another rather unfortunate byproduct of the entire, well, Nazi thing, besides all of the obvious war crimes and acts against humanity, is the fact that Hitler not only stole the swastika from Hinduism, but essentially tarnished the symbol forever. You see, I think it's relatively common knowledge now that the swastika doesn't originate with the Nazi Party. It actually originates in Hindu culture. In some Hindu cultures, the swastika can either mean prosperity and good luck, or being conducive to well-being, and it's a generally positive symbol. However, when the Nazis appropriated the symbol and used it to, well, represent one of the worst regimes to ever exist in modern, if not all of history, the symbol that they appropriated was essentially tarnished forever. Which is unfortunate because there has been some viral videos online of some uneducated person with a camera berating an Indian person for being a Nazi, when in reality, that's not the case at all. Beyond these few more lighter-hearted examples, there's a lot of other things that were outright banned due to the actions of Adolf Hitler. Although, for the sake of this video being a little bit more lighthearted, I want to discuss some that were not as, well, straight up depressing. And just to quickly save this video from getting too dark, I just wanted to say, by the time you're watching this video, we probably hit 1 million subscribers. And I just want to say thank you guys so much for all of the love and support on the entire channel. If you like my content and like what I do on this channel, please consider subscribing. We are no longer on the road to 1 million, we are on the road to 2 million. And if we're being honest, 10 million. At least that's the goal for now. YouTube does tell me that nearly 75% of you are not subscribed. So if you're watching this video and want to see videos from me every single Friday, subscribe and maybe even turn on the bell icon so you actually get notified when my videos go live. Oh, and by the way, if you really like this video, leave a like or comment part 2, and I'll definitely make a part 2 because I love making videos that my viewers actually want to see. But enough shilling. Thank you guys so much for the support. Let's get to our final section. Satisfaction not guaranteed. In the year 2025 and soon to be 2026, consumers are more privy than ever. And that's because businesses and individuals have been scamming people since the beginning of time. If you don't believe me, watch my video about scams in every time period. But with that being said, with people being more and more skeptical, businesses have had to come up with ways to convince customers that not only are they not being scammed, but if they are unhappy with their purchase, the business will take care of them. And it was for this reason that the satisfaction guarantee was established. The satisfaction guarantee is not necessarily a formal or governmental rule, it's essentially just a marketing trend and a company policy that kind of took off across corporate America. And honestly, it's a positive one that's in the consumer's favor. Now, I don't know about you, but every time I hear satisfaction guaranteed or refunds with no questions asked, I always am a bit skeptical. Although I've never really taken up any brands on this besides, well, you know, the basic refund. But I may be more of a rare breed here because I think some people get their fair use out of satisfaction guaranteed, and in the case I'm about to discuss, some people, unfortunately, well, abuse this system and ruin it for everyone. Unfortunately, there is no shortage of people abusing systems that are meant to help people and just offer fairness to all. And those people, I can confidently say, suck. And while to this day, satisfaction guarantees are still offered widely, I do want to discuss one example where somebody's selfish behavior revoked the consumer rights of a lot of customers from a specific brand. The brand in question is LL Bean. LL Bean is a famous clothing company that has had an almost legendary lifetime guarantee that it's offered for a long time on most of its clothes. The company took pride in this guarantee and used it as a symbol of the company's commitment to their product quality and overall customer satisfaction. And that, in my opinion, is noble. But as we learned in the first section of this video, no good deed goes unpunished. And just like somebody on death row exploiting a generous Texas prison, somebody buying jeans is gonna exploit a customer satisfaction policy. So here's the deal. For the longest time, LL Bean had one of the best lifetime guarantees possible. And it actually went on for decades. How it worked is customers could return any LL Bean product at any time to any location for a full refund. It didn't matter how old or how worn the garment was. If you had an LL Bean garment and you were no longer satisfied with it, you could take it to any LL Bean store to have it replaced. And in my opinion, that system is so cool. But of course, people had to ruin it. And in the case of LL Bean, they in 2018 made a statement and officially changed their policy. They essentially ended and revoked the lifetime guarantee on most of their products, limiting it to the standard return within a year if you have a proof of purchase. The 1-year return compared to the 30-day return is still generous, but it's a massive shift from what they originally had. And LL Bean even said themselves that the reason that they ended this program was due to a pattern of abuse of a small group of people, and they could no longer enable this behavior. Now, with that being said, LL Bean never pursued any legal actions or dropped any specific customer names, although they did make it known that people were abusing their generosity, and for that reason, they had to make some changes. This is definitely one of the more lighter examples we've discussed in this video, but it's definitely something that affects probably the most of us. And to me, it's truly just upsetting how one person or a small group of people can truly ruin a good thing for everybody. And I know it's easy at this point to get nihilistic and pessimistic and lose faith in humanity, but understand that it only is a small group of people doing it. And while it sucks that good things are being ruined, most people aren't doing these awful things. But I guess if we've learned anything from this video, all it takes is one. The craziest scams in every time period. The Stone Age. Admittedly, this section is going to be rather short, for a couple of reasons. Primarily being that the Stone Age is literally prehistoric, meaning that everything I'm about to discuss is essentially speculative. Also, because most of human life in the Stone Age was extremely simple, meaning that at this point, human life wasn't even able to comprehend the possibility of deception. If you had something that another human wanted, there was two options. Either they kill you to get the thing, or they die trying to kill you to get that thing. That was realistically the extent of scams in the Stone Age. Keep in mind, the Stone Age literally extends over 3.4 million years worth of history. The Stone Age contains 99.3% of all recorded human history, dating back around 300,000 years ago when Homo sapiens first appeared. So with that being said, what are some scams that could have possibly existed in the Stone Age? And let me present you a few interesting opportunities. Scam number one, the made you look scam. Here's how the scam goes. You are a caveman, and your enemy, also a caveman, comes to ask you a question. You decide you've had enough of his antics and point in the direction that's behind him. This caveman turns around, you pull out your trusty club and hit him in the head. Now, your enemy is dead, and you have just successfully committed a Stone Age scam. In modern terms, that's not much of a scam at all. But when it comes to prehistoric humans, things were simple. Just think about that one episode of SpongeBob that took place in the prehistoric times. That's kind of what we're working with here. But besides the petty theft and petty murder of the Stone Age, I believe one of the biggest scams out of the Stone Age was actually the existence of the Stone Age itself. You see, the Stone Age primarily is defined by its use of stone tools, specifically near the very end of the Stone Age. And this is because humans using stone tools signifies the evolution of human creativity, human engineering, human development. Now, you may be thinking, well, of course, we need this human development. This isn't a scam at all. This is beautiful. This is progress. And what I would say to you is, not really. Because look where it's gotten us. As humans, we used to sleep outside under the stars, do whatever we wanted all day, go to the bathroom anywhere. We essentially lived like animals, and it was great. Just look how good your dog or cat has it right now. We used to live like them, but now we wake up to an alarm, we go to a job, we commute, we have anxiety, we have bills. Our bills even have bills at this point. So although this scam may have not taken place in the Stone Age, it definitely started in the Stone Age. And potentially one of the biggest scams of the Stone Age was that one meddling, weaselly little caveman that decided to combine a stick with a rock. And maybe if he was the one who got clubbed, we would still be living that sweet animalistic lifestyle. This first section was a bit silly, but I didn't want to leave this Stone Age out of a video about every time period. But with that being said, as we now transition into recorded history, the scams are going to be historically documented and much more serious. But this is a Trust Me Bro video, so don't expect a documentary. The Bronze Age. No, not LeBron James. The Bronze Age. Not LeBron's Age. The Bronze Age. Yes, that was corny, and yes, we're keeping it in. We are now in the Bronze Age, the beginning of recorded scams. And the scam I'm going to be speaking about from the Bronze Age involves metal fraud, and also includes the earliest ever recorded customer complaint. Let me explain. The year is circa 1750 BC, right near the end of the Bronze Age. And there is a famous copper merchant named Ea Nasser. Ea Nasser, unsurprisingly, would buy and sell metals, specifically copper. And this merchant was no stranger to customer complaints, with one of the most famous examples coming from a customer named Nani. Nani's specific issue with Ea Nasser was that Ea Nasser was selling bad quality or low quality copper, and that was a big issue for Nani. Unlike the Stone Age, I'm not just making this up. This transaction and subsequent complaint is recorded in commercial tablets. These tablets were actually unearthed with a group of other tablets recording transactions and complaints about the copper quality. And these were all found in a home that was believed to at one point been owned by Ea Nasser, which is by itself just a really cool piece of history. Ea Nasser was a well-known copper merchant in his city and was even a member of an established and, relatively speaking, respected copper guild, meaning that he wasn't just any Joe Schmo. However, these credentials definitely didn't help him with his business dealings. Because although he may have been surrounded by proper, integral copper merchants, Nasir was likely nothing of the sort. And this is proven by the famous tablet sent to Nasir from Nani, which has actually been translated, and I'm about to read exactly what Nani said to Nasir, and I'll let you decide whether or not Nasir was a scammer. The tablet reads as follows. When you came, you said to me as follows. I will give Gimosin fine quality copper ingots. You left, but then you did not do what you promised. You put ingots which were not good before my messenger and said, if you want to take them, take them. If you do not want to take them, go away. Who do you take me for, that you treat someone like me with such contempt? I have sent as messengers gentlemen like ourselves to collect the bag with my money, but you have treated me with contempt by sending them back empty-handed several times. And that through enemy territory. Is there anyone among the merchants who trade with Dilmun who has treated me in this way? You alone treat my messenger with contempt. On account of that one trifling mina of silver which I owe you, you feel free to speak in such a way. While I have given to the palace on your behalf 1,080 pounds of copper, and Shubi Abum has likewise given 1,080 pounds of copper, apart from what we had both had written on a sealed tablet to be kept in the temple of Shamash. How have you treated me for that copper? You have withheld my money bag from me in enemy territory. It is now up to you to restore my money to me in full. Take cognizance that from now on I will not accept here any copper from you that is not of fine quality. I shall from now on select and take the ingots individually in my own yard, and I shall exercise against you my right of rejection because you have treated me with contempt. That was long, but I wanted to give you the exact full quote because I think it's extremely interesting, and I think that Nani's being rather patient and has more than enough reason to be upset. To summarize, Nasir, at least to Nani, is selling low quality copper, and not only is he selling a low quality product, but he's promising a high quality product, and when questioned by the servants that are going to pick up the product, he is not nice at all. He's very combative within these transactions, and not only that, he's also refusing to give a full or even partial refund to Nani after his complaint, and Nani has sent multiple messengers to collect a refund. And what does Nasir do? Turns him away empty-handed and sends him through enemy territory to risk the life of the messenger just to add insult to injury for Nani. I don't know about you, but if I was Nani, I would definitely be sending somebody else to Nasir's door that wasn't a messenger looking for my money back. But even after all of this, Nani isn't even refusing to deal with Nasir anymore. He's just saying that once he gets the copper from Nasir, he's going to go through and verify the quality himself before he buys it, which is something he likely should have been doing, but I guess didn't feel like he had to be doing because he was buying from a merchant in the Copper Guild. But lesson learned on Nani's part, check your metal as you buy it. So yeah, this one tablet that was found thousands of years after it was created went on to solidify Nasir as one of the most notorious Bronze Age businessmen and scammers. The Iron Age. The Iron Age is a very interesting time period, and it represents a change of power, at least in the world of metals, as the Iron Age literally represents iron becoming the prominent metal that is being mined, forged, and fashioned into tools and ornaments and armor. And the reason that transition was made is kind of a long story, but the transition from Bronze Age to Iron Age was harsh, and humanity as a whole took a step backwards before it could take 2 steps forwards as it transitioned from the Bronze Age to the Iron Age. However, the Iron Age is not free from scams, and it itself has a very interesting laundry list of scams that took place, with the one that I'm going to focus on involving silver coinage, debasement, and hyperinflation. Admittedly, the scam I'm about to discuss kind of bleeds out of the Iron Age, but I had other scams I wanted to associate with other time periods, so although this specific scam doesn't take place in the Iron Age, it definitely has its roots in the Iron Age. So I'm going to allow that technicality to make this work, because trust me, we do have some crazy scams coming up. The Iron Age is when we truly see the rise of coinage being used. During the mid to late Iron Age, we see coins being minted and being transacted with, which during this time in history, circa 600 BC, is a relatively new methodology of transacting, because up until this point, all of commerce was conducted through trade, one good for another. There was no store of value. It was simply merchandise for merchandise, no currency of any sort, at least in the form of coinage. Prior to coinage, precious metals were definitely the currency of choice, but they weren't necessarily currency, just something of value to most people, and a good way to store value efficiently, as they were non-perishable and value dense for the most part. Now, even during this time in the late Iron Age, these coins that were being made weren't even used for transacting yet. They were primarily religious objects, typically used as badges or medals. But it didn't take too long for these people that were creating these interesting, valuable metals to create something that had trade value. Specifically with ancient Greek coinage being minted by the Ionian Greeks in the late late 6th century, right at the ass crack of the Iron Age. And it is believed that these ancient Greek coins were the first coins ever to be used for transacting on a large-scale basis, and they were made primarily of small silver fractions. But this recent innovation of commerce spread like wildfire through the 5th and 6th century BC and quickly became the standard, primarily being pioneered by the ancient Greeks and other empires of the time. But this in itself isn't the scam. It's simply the context for the scam that we are about to discuss. This context is important because it anchors us to the Iron Age, although what we're about to discuss happens slightly after the Iron Age and involves actually the Roman Empire. During the Iron Age, ancient Rome is established, and during the end of the Iron Age, the Roman Republic is established. And during these times, the innovation with iron is giving Rome a lot of strength and a lot of military capability. And due to the rise of ancient Rome and then the Roman Republic, we find ourselves with the Roman Empire, which, like I mentioned, isn't in the Iron Age, but we're making it count. And it's with the Roman Empire that we find ourselves with our very next scam. The scam being coin debasement. And this one scam actually ended up being a contributing factor to the fall of the Roman Empire. By the time that the Roman Empire was established, coinage was in full effect and used effectively and worked as follows. Early coinage would be made out of pure or near pure materials, typically gold, silver, and copper. These ingots would be purchased, minted, and then sold into circulation with a face value slightly above their metal value. This allowed the government to make a small profit on every coin that they minted and also allowed the currency to keep a consistent value, as it had an intrinsic value of the metal it was made out of, while it also had a face value of only slightly above that, which everyone generally accepted. Coins typically varied in value from region to region, meaning that in simple modern terms, if you had a coin that had a face value of $2, but was, made out of $1.50's worth of silver, in your region, you can trade this for $2. But if you go to a different region where they have their own coinage, they're not going to accept your coinage at face value, but they'll take it at intrinsic value, meaning that your $2 coin in this new region is now worth $1.50. And this system actually incentivized local trade, as you are going to get the most bang for your buck. But the scam we are going to discuss is the debasement of coin that happened when the government wanted to inflate the number of coins that they could produce, and they tried to do so rather sneakily. There was two primary methods of debasement when they started to use this practice. When the government would mint these coins, they would either make them slightly lighter than they were supposed to be, meaning that they would mint a coin and then shave parts off of it to reclaim small scraps, or they would simply use a poor quality metal. This would save them money and make the coins that they're minting cheaper, while they would still be selling them for the same face value, giving the government extra funds. But these methods of debasement continued and began to progress and became more and more severe. What the Roman Empire began to do was start devaluing their coins by not making them a little lighter or using a lower quality material, but actually reducing the percentage of precious metals in the coins. Early coinage of the Roman Empire consisted of anywhere from 93 to 97% of the precious metal they were supposed to be. But it didn't take long for the government to reduce this number from 93% in 107 AD to 78.5% in 193 AD, and then to 35% in 254 AD, and then 20% in 257 AD, and then all the way down until 5% silver in 270 AD. The impact of this was obviously massive, as this massive influx of token supply and massive decline in intrinsic value of these tokens created hyperinflation. And runaway hyperinflation actually happened multiple times throughout the Roman Empire. As I mentioned before, most of this debasement would happen to fund military campaigns to try to get more land, more money, more power, and they likely justified this debasement by saying they were going to collect more wealth for the greater empire. Although what really happened was prices would rise, and the value of coins that everybody was collecting, holding, trading with was dropping significantly. And it wasn't unheard of for an army to go on a campaign, get paid their money, only to realize that once they go to spend their money, the big paycheck that they thought they had gotten is now only worth a few days' meals, which obviously put pressure between the government and the army, something that no government wants to have. I think it's important to note that in modern times, the creation of money and steady inflation is something we kind of just accept, and it's part of how our currency operates. However, at this time, each individual coin had an intrinsic value, and that was the backing of its value. And even if you paid for currency in your local region and took it to a different region, even if they did not accept your region's currency, they would still pay you what your precious metal was worth, meaning that your money could never go to nothing. I suppose to put it in a modern day context, imagine if the government just said, hey, actually it's cheaper to make $1 bills than it is to make $5 bills. So all new $1 bills are actually $5. and the government just wrote a 5 on a $1 bill. You can still see that it's a $1 bill, but you and everyone else is supposed to act like it's a $5 bill. That's going to create some suspiciousness. And even that, admittedly, is a bad analogy, because the currency that we use today all has the same intrinsic value of nothing, at least not in its physical form. With early coinage in the Iron Age, there was forgery, debasement, and fraud. But I wanted to cover the hyperinflation of the Roman Empire because I thought it was a great summary of what was brewing in the Iron Age at a major historical scale. And while the Roman Empire did not exist in the Iron Age, ancient Rome did. And I'm making this point abundantly clear to prevent any sort of misinformation. And truthfully, the hyperinflation of the Roman Empire was the best example of coin debasement I could find. So I decided to take a story out of the future and apply it to the Iron Age to make the section the best it could be. So yeah, Rome was formed in the Iron Age, coins were formed in the Iron Age, but likely the most famous example of coin debasement and hyperinflation happened a little after and involved the Roman government literally scamming its people by making the currency cheaper and worse while still maintaining the same face value. And well, it backfired on everybody. The Classical Era. Although we are now in the Classical Era, the scam that we're about to discuss is anything but classy and actually contains what is believed to be the first instance of insurance fraud, which is just great to hear that people have been committing insurance fraud for thousands of years. Perhaps insurance fraud is just in our DNA. In the Classical Era, there was a man in ancient Greece known as Hegestratos, and he was a little bit of a knucklehead. During roughly 5th century BCE, near the beginning of the Classical Era, maritime trade was booming. Hegestratos was a ship owner and was profiting from this maritime trade that was taken off. And because he had a big and beautiful and shiny ship, he decided that it would be wise to get insurance, which he did. And this insurance not only covered his cargo, but also his ship on any given sea voyage. How it would work is lenders would lend money to these seafarers using the ship and its loot as collateral. The lender would say, hey, your boat is worth 2 gold ingots and everything in it is worth 5 gold ingots. Great, I'll give you 7 gold ingots. If you come back from your journey of trade with 10 ingots worth of stuff, that's great. Give me 9 ingots. That means I make a 2 ingot profit and you make a 1 ingot profit. But if your ship sinks while you're on this voyage, you don't have to give me anything. That's essentially how the insurance existed, and this helped mitigate the risk for the seafarer and also gave these lenders the opportunity to make money with some risk, but obviously nobody was going to be incentivized to sink their own ship or not come back with loot. The whole point of the voyage was to make money, right? That's where Hegestratos comes in. Hegestratos realized that he didn't actually need to go on any adventures at all, and he didn't even need to fill up his boat with loot. What Hegestratos ended up deciding to do was he would fill his ship with things that looked valuable, and what he would typically do was fill crates with sand, cheap ornaments, with sometimes boxes of valuables on top to make it appear that the whole ship was full of valuables, when in reality there was a layer of valuables on top of a lot of boxes of basically garbage. This would make the ship appear heavy and full and also give creditors a good reason to give him a good insurance policy. Already, Hegestratos was scamming because creditors would give Hegestratos an inflated value, essentially. If Hegestratos was able to convince creditors that his boat was worth at least 2 gold ingots and the contents of his boat were extremely expensive dyes and spices and metals, maybe they would say that the contents of his boat were worth 10 gold ingots, when in reality it was only worth 2 gold ingots when the rest was dirt and sand. That is obviously a scam. But now, sure, Hegestratos has a bunch of gold ingots, but he also has debt, and he's not going to go sail away and make money off of dirt. So what does he do instead? Well, he would go take this boat and deliberately sink it. Now, all of the money that the creditor had given him was his money, fair and straight, and he really was out nothing, and he could continue this plan over and over. And it wasn't long before Hegestratos' scam was exposed. And this kind of shocked the ancient Greek world, because during this time, there was integrity and respect for the law and understanding when it came to commerce. And such a fraud was not even necessarily thought of. But when this scam was exposed, it kind of exposed the vulnerability in these early financial contracts and how people could manipulate things in a way that may seem counterintuitive, but would ultimately be beneficial for the scammer. The case of Hegestratos is considered to be one of the biggest scams of the Classical Era. Not only because it was just so ballsy, but also because it was the first instance of insurance scam and kind of gave the entire insurance industry a huge shakeup and a wake-up call for how they had to protect themselves moving forward when they were crediting people who could potentially screw them over. So yeah, the Classical Era, I'm sure, had more scams than you could count, but I definitely think the case of Hegestratos is one of the most interesting and definitely one of the most defining of this time period, the Medieval Era. I don't know about you, but I feel like the medieval era is definitely one of the most interesting parts of history. You have castles, knights, kingdoms, wealth inequality, and a plethora of scams. What is there not to enjoy? It was honestly a bit tough to pick just one scam for the medieval era, but I'm happy with the one I chose, so let's get right into it. There's no doubt that in medieval times, the Christian religion was everything. And this is kind of proven by all of the art, architecture, writings, everything was the Christian religion. And with every fan base comes collectors. And while the Christian religion didn't necessarily have marketable plushies at the time, they definitely had a huge underground market for relics. And these relics were definitely odd, to say the least. Potentially the most famous Christian relic would be the Holy Grail, but it's definitely not the only relic that people were interested in getting their hands on. With some of the most popular and sought after ancient relics being the literal bones of saints. Like, let's say there was a famous saint who was very prolific and known in the church. Well, once they die, if you could get one of their bones, you could possess their magical powers. Like, literally, that was the mindset. Merchants and other saints and even individuals wanted these bones for a plethora of different reasons. Wealthy individuals would typically want to collect these relics to help make their own desires and dreams come true, as these Christian relics were believed to essentially cause miracles. And in that instance, if there was an object that could bless you, that could make all of your dreams come true, that could protect your family and defeat your enemies, is there really a price you wouldn't pay for them? But here's the thing. Not many people had this money at all. And what people resorted to was visiting churches that had these relics so that they could gain the power and benefit of them from a fraction of the price. And that's exactly why bishops and priests would collect these relics. Obviously, they would see the value of these blessed items that could provide miracles as something that they would want to have in their life and in their church, but they also noticed that any church with a relic was gaining more foot traffic, more donations, and became more or less of a landmark and a hotspot for pilgrimages. And this is where the business opportunity arose. Merchants, whether they believed in the power of these relics or not, if a merchant was able to get their hands on a relic at a decent price, they could sell it to almost anybody with money for an astonishing profit. Here's the issue. As the popularity and demand grew for relics, the supply didn't really. Which was great for investors because, supply and demand, but that also gave incentive for others. The only way that a relic could really even be brought into this underground market was by a crusader who would go and reclaim the relic from the Holy Land, or a merchant who would do business in the Holy Land, hopefully trying to get a relic or something close to a relic that they could buy cheap and sell for a massive profit back in Europe. But these two methods were slow and could not keep up with demand whatsoever, which is why some interesting individuals decided to help contribute to that supply chain issue. Here's the deal. Obviously, these relics have absolutely no certificate of authenticity or receipt or any sort of tracking on where they came from. It's essentially just word of mouth. So if you were a respected or authoritative or even just a charismatic figure, you could kind of pass off anything as a relic with enough convincing. And that's exactly the scam that we are going to discuss. Fake black market Christian relics. Some famous examples of this would be fake bones. For example, Saint John the Baptist was a famous saint that people claimed to have relics of, and these relics were his bones. But once all of the bones that were claimed to be his were accounted for and organized, it was concluded that either Saint John had 3 heads and 5 arms, or some people had some fake relics. 2 other famous and common fake relics were pieces of the Holy Shroud and splinters from the cross that Jesus was crucified on. Obviously, any part of either of these items would have extreme significance to history, and even the tiniest morsel of either of these items would be massively valuable. And for that reason, people decided to make their own. At the time, the only way that these relics could be verified is if they actually had provable miracle abilities. So if a church had a relic in it and somebody with a disability was healed, or a sick person was made healthy again, or a dying person was living longer, or a poor man came into money, if any of these happened after somebody encountered the relic would have been proved real. And the people who had experienced miracles from these relics would go and tell their friends and their family, essentially marketing the church that had this relic in-house. But even with that being said, who's to say if these people had experienced miracles from genuine or non-genuine items? It really kind of gets messy from there. Once the industry of fake relics began to become exposed, it was almost a running joke at the time that if they bought all of the splinters being sold from the cross, they would actually be able to build a warship out of all of the wood. If anybody tries to sell you a piece of wood telling you that it came from the cross that Jesus was crucified on, I would probably pass, or at least confirm it can do miracles before you buy it. The Renaissance era. If you've watched any of my time period videos, you would know that I've actually never covered the Renaissance era by itself, mostly because the time period itself is short and kind of similar to the era that took place before it. One of the most famous figures to come out of the Renaissance era was Michelangelo, likely most famous for his statue of David. But did you know that he got his start by scamming? Circa 1496, Michelangelo sculpted a marble sleeping Cupid. It was an extremely lifelike and beautiful sculpture that highlighted exactly how talented Michelangelo was even at an early age. But during the Renaissance era, art collectors weren't necessarily looking for modern art. They were looking for historic pieces, which typically meant ancient Roman or Greek statues, rather than new ones. So what Michelangelo did with this statue of the Cupid was he decided, instead of selling it for a cheaper price compared to the antiques, he decided to make his new statue an antique by intentionally wearing it down. It's not quite confirmed how he did it, but he made sure to make this sculpture look worn. And it obviously worked because he was actually able to sell it as a lost Roman antiquity. And not only was he able to sell it, but he sold it for a much higher price than he was initially looking for. This sculpture was actually sold to a cardinal, Raphael Riario, who initially was fooled, but eventually discovered the truth. When Cardinal Raphael discovered the truth and confronted Michelangelo, he wasn't upset with him, he was actually impressed, and he invited Michelangelo to Rome. And when Michelangelo came to Rome, he was given his first major opportunity in his career, and this was the actual opportunity that launched Michelangelo's career and made him the icon that he is today. This cardinal was able to understand the genius of the young Michelangelo, and was likely thinking that if he could point him in the right direction, he could create one of the best artists of all time. So yeah, as far as Renaissance scams are concerned, I think Michelangelo selling one of his original artworks as an antiquity summarizes this era perfectly. And it's kind of ironic to think that Michelangelo literally had to make his art something else to try and sell it. Regardless, Michelangelo was dope. But when he was starting out, he was definitely clever when it came to selling his art. The early modern era. We've covered a lot of scams in this video so far, but one scam we haven't covered is the fake king scam. Obviously, because you can't fake being a king, right? There's no way you can just tell people that, hey, actually, I'm the king. Not only are people not going to believe you, but you're likely going to be killed. And that's the truth unless your name was Perkin Warbeck, who in the 1490s not only claimed to be a king, but also became a serious threat for the reigning king at the time. And he gained significant backing and support. But before we get to how this entire scam ends, let me tell you how it starts. Perkin Warbeck claimed to be the younger of the two princes in the tower, which, if you're unfamiliar, the princes in the tower refers to a mysterious disappearance of two young royals. King Edward V of England and his younger brother, Prince Richard of Shrewsbury, Duke of York. They were both heirs to the throne of King Edward IV of England, but at the ages of 12 and 9, they were locked away in the Tower of London by their uncle, and they were never seen again. This obviously caused a lot of issues within the kingdom, but for Perkin Warbeck, this created an opportunity. Before pretending to be a king, Warbeck was born into a rich merchant class family and traveled around and spent time in Ireland selling silks before him and his friend came up with the plan to impersonate the younger of the two brothers who disappeared. As this missing person was not only not found, but was an heir to a throne, meaning that if this person was found, they had legitimate claim to the kingdom, which is definitely a title worth fighting for. Warbeck didn't just necessarily hit the streets telling everybody, hey, by the way, I'm the prince and I'm back and I'm totally good. He was very strategic in who he decided to lay his claim to, which was high-ranking government officials. He gained his first piece of notable support from King Charles VIII of France. And this is a major piece of backing to have behind you, because if the king of another country recognizes and supports you as the lost heir to a throne, you have some serious credibility to your claim. But this didn't last long. As King Henry VII, the current king, had formed an alliance with the King of France, there was no longer support from the King of France to be helping Perkin Warbeck. So we kind of had to start from scratch once again. So the next place that Perkin Warbeck went for support is actually insane, because he went to the actual sister of the lost princes in the tower, and not only did he go there to claim that he was her long-lost brother, but she bought it up. She was like, oh yeah, you are totally my long-lost brother. And now this support was likely even more valuable than the initial support, because no sibling is going to accept a faker as their long-lost sibling, right? Regardless of their beliefs or intentions, this duchess appeared to believe Perkin Warbeck, and with this support, Perkin continued his conquest to claim that he was the long-lost king. The following year, in 1493, he attended the funeral of Maximilian's father, Frederick III, where he was actually recognized as King Richard IV of England at the funeral. And it only took 2 more years in 1495 for support for Warbeck to have the throne bubbling within England. Warbeck was actually able to gather an army of 150 people and attempted a landing in Kent, where Warbeck and his small army were met with locals who were loyal to their actual king, Henry VII, and the Battle of Deal ensued. Most of this army died, and Warbeck retreated back to Ireland. But even in Ireland, he was facing issues and once again fled to Scotland. While in Scotland, Perkin was actually able to set up an arranged marriage with one of the relatives of the king, known as Lady Catherine Gordon. And now, after officially becoming royalty in some regard, the Scottish palace was open to Warbeck to gather his army and begin to plan another attack on England. The attack that Perkin Warbeck and the Scottish king had planned ended up failing before it even started. And what I mean by that is, before the battle even started, they essentially retreated. But the following year, the Scottish king and Warbeck tried again, but this time their landing was different. In 1497, support for the current king of England was low, primarily to new taxes and rising legislation. And for this reason, and because more time had passed for people to sympathize with Perkin, who was pretending to be the lost king, there was slightly more popularity for him on English soil. So this landing was met with some support. He actually was able to raise a rebellion and was declared King Richard IV, the person he was claiming to be this entire time. And at this point, it may have seemed that his plan was successful, and his next plan of attack was to siege the city, where King Henry VII was currently residing. And this siege failed, and once again, his men died, and Perkin Warbeck had to go into hiding once again. And he was able to flee successfully. Well, at least successfully because he escaped the battle alive, but not fully successfully, because the place that he ended up residing applied a lot of pressure to Perkin. So much pressure so that he actually ended up surrendering himself to the English government because he was promised a pardon if he surrendered instead of causing any more battles. In 1497, while being tried in front of the real king himself, Perkin Warbeck finally came clean about his elaborate scam and fake life. He told the king that he was not the prince in the tower and he was not royalty whatsoever. He straight up admitted to being a pretender because he was promised immunity for telling the truth. But obviously that wasn't the case. After this admission, he was kept close to the king and essentially imprisoned. And a year later, he actually tried to escape England, where he was caught and brought back, and at that point he was put ironically in the Tower of London, where the initial two lost princes were lost from. And it was in here where Perkin Warbeck tried to plan another escape and another overthrowing of the government essentially. That plan was uncovered and Perkin Warbeck was executed in 1499. This was a bit of a longer segment, but I wanted to go into detail because this story is literally insane. In a 9-year span, Perkin Warbeck is going from a rich kid who's just living in Ireland selling silk to, from the suggestion of a friend, dedicating the next 9 years of his life essentially on a conquest to claim that he is the long-lost heir to the throne and trying to overthrow the English king, in which he almost does successfully and ends up admitting everything and then dying because of it. If that's not a scam, I don't know what is. The modern era. Unfortunately, there is absolutely no shortage of scams in the modern day, and I'm sure anybody watching this video right now could name at least 5 to 10 scams just off the top of their head. And that's primarily because of access of information. And at least today, scams are exposed quicker than they would have been at any point in history before. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're exposed quickly enough. Terrifying mental disorders you've never heard of. Cotard syndrome. During the late 1880s, French neurologist Jules Cotard had a very peculiar experience with one of his patients. Her name was Mademoiselle X, and she came to the neurologist claiming that she didn't need to eat anymore. She said this because she believed that she was dead. For some reason, this patient was fully convinced that she had no stomach, no chest, no blood, and no brain. And she knew for a fact that she simply wasn't alive and was not able to die. She told Cotard that she must have been condemned to eternal damnation, and for that reason she cannot possibly die a natural death. As if she could have, she would have died already, as her organs were rotting and she didn't have any blood. And because this patient believed that she had no internal organs, she simply stopped eating as there was no need to, and unsurprisingly, she later died of starvation. This interaction that Jules Cotard had experienced with this patient definitely left an imprint on him and forced him to document everything that this patient was saying and every symptom that they were having. Through this study, he coined the term Cotard syndrome and described the condition as the delusion of negation, stating that it was a psychiatric syndrome that varied in severity. He claimed that mild cases were characterized by despair and self-loathing, while severe cases were characterized by intense delusions of negation and chronic psychiatric depression. Now, although this sounds like an odd one-off story that happened almost 200 years ago, that's not at all the case, and this syndrome still exists today. And while it is extremely rare, there are still people suffering from this syndrome around the world. Cotard syndrome is also known as the walking corpse syndrome. The main symptom of having Cotard syndrome is having a strong belief that you are dead. Many people with this condition simply believe that their internal organs are rotting, or that those organs are missing altogether and they are just existing existing but not alive. A statistical analysis of people suffering from this study showed that 55% of patients with Cotard syndrome believed that they were immortal due to this condition, while the other 45% denied their own existence, claiming that they did not exist, which is definitely a hard sell when you're the one explaining you don't exist. Cotard syndrome is relatively simple to understand, but I'm sure for its patients it's an extremely terrifying experience. Just imagine being fully convinced that you're either missing organs or having organs that are rotting away, or just simply believing that you are somehow dead. It's almost mind-bending trying to even comprehend the mindset in the first place, so I couldn't even imagine how confusing it is to be experiencing that as a reality. Most of the people experiencing these delusions typically end up neglecting their personal care, refusing to eat, clean themselves, sleep, use the washroom, and also may experience self-harming behaviors, all because that they believe there is no reason to maintain a body that they literally consider to be lifeless. To this day, very little is known about this syndrome, but it is still associated with severe depression, schizophrenia, and other neurological issues such as brain lesions. Cotard syndrome is a very peculiar mental condition, but for this list, it's only the tip of the iceberg, and we're just getting into some of the most terrifying and rare mental conditions. Koro. I want you to be honest. Have you ever looked down and thought, dang, my little bro must be shrinking. It was never this small. Well, in that case, you might be suffering from Koro. Honestly, I don't even know where to begin with it. It's also known as genital retraction syndrome or shrinking penis disease, both of which definitely give an odd foundation, and both of which are actually not even fully accurate. And while Koro is a syndrome that does occur worldwide, it is considered a cultural bound delusion, essentially meaning that the symptoms of this delusion are only recognized in specific societies and cultures. Patients suffering with Koro experience overwhelming and intense beliefs that their sexual organs are retracting, and while this literally isn't happening, these people suffering from this disease will go to extreme lengths to prevent this shrinkage from happening. Most people suffering from this condition typically begin by reporting anxiety attacks due to their perceived lack of genitalia, and this perceived shrinkage will be a huge cause of stress for the individual suffering from Koro. And if you're a woman, don't think you're safe from Koro, because there are women who experience Koro, but obviously they aren't experiencing their penis shrinking. They believe that their nipples are retracting and that their breasts are also retracting into their bodies, slowly shrinking. There are cases in which patients experiencing Koro symptoms will have these symptoms for years, and at that point it will be considered chronic. And to doctors, that is an indication of a potential comorbidity with body dysmorphic disorder, also known as BDD. Interestingly, a lot of people experiencing Koro also experience an intense anxiety or fear of impending death, essentially meaning that these people believe that their genitals will shrink so small that they are literally going to die. And this specific belief has a strong cultural link to traditional Chinese beliefs. This sounds kind of silly and obviously odd, but the delusions that these patients are experiencing are nothing funny and truly terrifying. This delusion can cause extreme anxiety, panic, compulsive behaviors, and even habits such as genital stretching to prevent this perceived shrinkage or retraction. The cause for this delusion isn't fully clear, but it is believed to be primarily fueled by cultural beliefs and stress. Now, like I mentioned, if you are experiencing Koro, you aren't actually experiencing any sort of shrinkage of any of your body parts, but what's interesting is that there is a bit of a devious feedback loop that you are getting. Typically, when people are experiencing a Koro attack, they will experience vasoconstriction, which will actually cause their genitals to temporarily shrink a little bit. This actually affirms their delusion and causes a very vicious cycle until the delusion is so strong that it is simply a core belief. And while this vasoconstriction is only temporary, when you are believing such a odd delusion, you are not necessarily thinking logically about this. And even when presented with the fact, it is still hard to come to the conclusion that you are not shrinking. Depending on what culture you're a part of when you are experiencing this Koro, the treatments may differ. In traditional Chinese medicine, typically the remedy that is recommended is a herbal tincture that is applied to your genitals. While in some African cultures, people experiencing Koro will be prescribed a weight to attach to their genitals to help stretch it, to of course maintain its size. Neither of these remedies sound particularly pleasant, and this entire affliction, while silly seeming, is definitely rare. It is a bit unfortunate that your body is almost unwillingly feeding into your delusion by shrinking your junk during these times of panic, unintentionally feeding your delusion more and more. However, typically instances of Koro are not lifelong. Although we may be able to get a chuckle out of it, it's definitely something I would never want to experience. So yeah, Koro literally has men believing that their penis is shrinking and it's gonna get so small that they are literally going to die. And it's still only the second entry on this list. Let's keep going. Body integrity identity disorder. Body integrity identity disorder, also known as BIID, is a condition that I felt made a lot of sense to put here because it kind of relates to the last one, although it's not fully the same. People who are experiencing Koro disorder believe that one of their appendages is shrinking and they are trying to maintain it, whereas people with BIID experience essentially a disassociation from one of their limbs. What this means is that people experiencing this condition essentially don't want either part or one or multiple of their limbs because to them it just doesn't feel like it's theirs. To try to understand how these people are feeling, people with BIID have described it as imagining that you are growing a new limb. That would feel unnatural and you obviously wouldn't want that there. That's how people with BIID feel about their natural born limbs. And people experiencing this condition typically go to extreme lengths to essentially feel normal, typically by seeking amputation for the perfectly healthy limb. Some patients with severe cases of this disorder even wish and desire to become paraplegic. This condition is extremely rare and also uncommonly studied, meaning that there is not much known about it, besides the fact that it blurs the lines between psychiatry and neurology. And for most people suffering from BIID, treatment specifically focuses on understanding the underlying cause for this deep desire. And like I mentioned, for some, does result in amputation. Imagine how you would feel if you felt like there was a part of your body that simply was alien to you, and with nobody to relate to or to be able to give you any sort of answers, it must be a lonely and heartbreaking experience. One thing that came to mind when researching this specific disorder was that one episode of Dr. Phil when that lady poured, I believe it was like drain cleaner in her eyes to make herself permanently blind because she just wanted to be blind. I'm not sure if she was suffering specifically from BIID, but it definitely seems like she was suffering similar symptoms and obviously didn't feel like she was supposed to have the ability to see. But speaking of these limbs feeling alien, let's discuss the next mental disorder. Alien hand syndrome. Alien hand syndrome varies pretty drastically from BIID in one major way. People experiencing alien hand syndrome don't feel like their hand isn't supposed to be part of their body. Their hand simply doesn't act in accordance to their will, almost as if their hand was a sentient being or acting on its own will or potentially an alien limb to your body. Patients experiencing alien hand syndrome typically experience symptoms in their left hand, and what this hand does typically varies depending on the severity of the situation. In 1908, when alien hand syndrome was first discovered, a 57-year-old woman was actually attacked by her alien hand, with this hand consistently smacking and trying to choke the woman, and she had to fight for her life to prevent her rogue limb from killing her. And while this example is extreme and obviously terrifying, it's not the norm, although it isn't uncommon for this rogue limb to do things that you likely wouldn't want them to. Like undressing yourself in public, or simply spilling food or drink, or simply dropping things for no apparent reason. Interestingly, while the first case was reported in 1908, the number of cases actually increased in the 1940s onward when a specific surgery for epilepsy began to become more popular. The specific epilepsy surgery that was correlated with alien hand syndrome was a surgery that essentially disconnected both sides of the brain, cutting the corpus callosum down the center of the brain. The corpus callosum is essentially a bridge of nerves that connects the left brain to the right brain. And disconnecting them, although effective for epilepsy, had consequences. And while that specific epilepsy treatment isn't the only cause for alien hand syndrome, it was definitely one of the most prominent initially. However, with more recent research, it has been discovered that people with medial frontal cortex or parietal lobe damage can also suffer from an alien hand. Although, depending on the area of your brain that was damaged, you will get a different type of alien hand syndrome, which is interesting and also pretty scary. Which I suppose makes sense, but definitely doesn't make it any less scary. People who had their medial frontal cortex damaged typically experience their alien hand being mischievous, with the most common symptoms being impulsive groping and the reluctance to let go of anything. With damage to your corpus callosum, typically you experience your hands literally fighting each other, which I can only imagine is a very unpleasant and scary experience. Now, somewhat differently, people with damage to their parietal lobe experience this condition a bit differently, as they not only don't have control over this arm and have it kind of do whatever it wants, they also feel estranged from this limb. Similar, but not to the same extent that people with BIID experience. But just imagine that. Not only do you feel like this limb that is on your natural body doesn't belong to you, but also not even being able to control it. It simply is there, part of you, but it kind of has a mind of its own. That is undeniably terrifying. Currently, the direct cause for why this happens in the brain is unknown, and unfortunately, there isn't a cure either. One of the most popular treatments is pretty simple and basically just involves making your alien hand hold on to an object consistently to give it something to do, essentially. I think being born with this condition, you could likely learn to adapt to it relatively quickly and it could be part of normal life. But I think one of the most terrifying parts about this disease is that it's typically developed later in life, meaning that you can live a totally normal life having control of both of your arms. And by getting brain damage in one way or another, not only can you lose control of one of your limbs, but you can literally lose control of one of your limbs. Like, this limb isn't just paralyzed. It is doing things without your consent. It has a mind of its own. And depending on the severity of what this hand is doing, you may have a violent appendage attached to your body with its sights aimed at you. Alice in Wonderland syndrome. Alice in Wonderland syndrome is a neurological disorder that distorts your perception. Typically, this distortion is experienced visually, and these visual distortions are perceived by objects either appearing larger than they are, or smaller than they are, or closer than they are, or potentially even farther than they are. And as you may be able to assume, this is extremely debilitating. These are only a few of the over 60 symptoms associated with Alice in Wonderland syndrome. The Alice in Wonderland books and movies are interesting and fun and whimsical, but when that sort of psychedelic experience is your consistent reality, it becomes a lot less appealing. And for patients suffering with this condition, they can experience not only visual, but also auditory, touch, and time perception issues. It's important to note that these aren't necessarily hallucinations. They're simply a misinterpretation of real things that are happening for a reason that is not fully understood. All that is known about Alice in Wonderland syndrome is that it's currently associated with migraines, head trauma, and EBV, Epstein-Barr virus. In most cases, patients don't experience symptoms consistently, but rather in series of attacks where suddenly almost everything in their reality changes. Just imagine you're sitting on the couch watching TV when all of a sudden the TV that you're looking at becomes 5 times bigger and the room that you're in becomes 10 times smaller, and all of a sudden all you hear is ringing and people talking, and it feels like time's moving really slow and then really fast, and everything's consistently changing, and you have almost no ground, no basis of reality, and you can't trust what you're seeing, hearing, smelling, or touching, and all you can simply do is wait it out. But this wait itself can seem endless with the perception of time being so distorted. However, as disorienting and terrifying as this experience may sound, this disease is pretty understudied and currently isn't considered a neurological disorder or a psychiatric illness, and is kind of just in this medical gray area. And currently there isn't even a known number of how many people are experiencing this mental condition to begin with. A reason for why it's low priority to be researched is because it's not considered to be dangerous, which I suppose is a nice benefit. However, 15% of people that do experience this condition have their attack almost instantly followed up with a migraine, which definitely adds insult to injury. And in that case, there is at least pain associated with this disorienting experience. This condition has been seen in both adults and children, but is most commonly seen in children. And while its cause is unknown, during studies of people who have been actively having these attacks, there is abnormal amounts of electrical activity taking place inside the patient's brain, resulting in an abnormal amount of blood flow to certain parts of the brain that process visual perception and texture. Regardless, even with the lack of classification and little known information about this disease, to me, the experience of Alice in Wonderland syndrome does sound terrifying and extremely unfortunate for those who suffer essentially in silence with almost no answers. It almost sounds like a random bad trip that you don't consent to and can happen at almost any time. Something I wouldn't wish on anybody. But we do still have one more entry to discuss. And quickly, before we get to this final entry on the list, I did want to mention, there was at least another 10 or 15 entries that I researched and wanted to put in this video that I simply had to cut for time, because we post videos every Friday. So with that, if you guys liked this video about rare and terrifying mental disorders, please let me know if you guys would like a part 2. I've got plenty more to talk about, and I'd also love to hear if you guys have any recommendations in the comments below. That being said, let's get to the final entry on this list. Capgras delusion. There's no doubt that every entry on this list in one way or another has been upsetting, disheartening, terrifying, and of course, obscure. But I saved this entry for last because I believe it to be one of likely the most upsetting and depressing entries on this list. But the belief that patients suffering from this delusion believe is extremely disheartening. Those suffering from Capgras delusion believe that someone close to them, typically a loved one, has been replaced by an identical imposter. And in some cases, they even believe that this imposter is going to do them harm. Unsurprisingly, Capgras delusions are typically associated with people experiencing paranoid schizophrenia, but these delusions are also present in people with dementia, brain tumors, and brain injuries. How this works is when you see another human's face, your eyes send a signal to the occipital cortex in your brain, and from there, that signal is sent to the fusiform part of the brain. This part of the brain is specifically responsible for facial recognition, which allows you to not only recognize people, but also tell people apart. The fusiform part of the brain then sends a signal to the amygdala, and based on the signal that the amygdala gets, it will release specific chemicals depending on how you perceive this person. These chemicals are essentially the precursor to emotions, and help your brain understand how you love and how you care about someone, and who you love and who you care about. Now, for people with Capgras delusion, their brain varies, because the fusiform part of their brain is not sending a strong enough signal to the amygdala, essentially meaning you can recognize somebody's face, but you're not getting the chemical reaction allowing you to essentially feel the emotions you're supposed to feel when seeing and thinking about that person. That lack of chemical release makes this person seem foreign or alien, or like something is missing, which is where the delusion comes into play, that this person must not be the real person that I know and love. This must be an imposter. This must be a clone. This must be a fake. And that is essentially how we understand how this delusion comes to be. And while we may understand how it happens, it doesn't make it any less terrifying or upsetting. If any of you watching this have experienced a family member with Alzheimer's, then you kind of know what I'm talking about. How upsetting and how scary it is to see somebody that you've known all of your life simply not remember you anymore, or to even not like you anymore. Growing up, one of my grandmothers actually had Alzheimer's, and during the later stages of it, she not only forgot who my sister was, who was living with her at the time, she also began to resent my sister for seemingly no reason. I can't imagine how that would feel to have not only your grandmother forget you, but begin to hate you and openly cuss you out and disrespect you. Of course, you have to understand that that's not them, that that's the disease, but it still hurts, and it's disheartening to see the deterioration of a loved one. Obviously, Alzheimer's and schizophrenia as well are terrifying and upsetting diseases, but this video is specifically focused on unheard of and obscure diseases, which is why I didn't outright mention them. Focusing back on Capgras delusion, not only do people suffering from this believe that someone that they love or know may be replaced by some sort of clone, but depending on the severity of their condition, what they do about this belief could range drastically. For example, the person experiencing this delusion may refuse to talk to that person altogether, as they do not believe that that's actually their loved one. In other cases, the person experiencing these delusions may actually physically assault or attack these people, as they believe that they have done something negative with their loved one and replace them, and they want to find answers. And in most cases, people refuse to believe any evidence to prove that they are not an imposter. And some people even become obsessed with exposing this imposter, going to almost any lengths to expose the true reality, which is obviously just a delusion. It's for this reason that I wanted to save this condition for the end of the list, because I believe on this list it's definitely the most terrifying and upsetting. And as of right now, there is little known, no cure, and not even treatment available for this delusion. Mental health is no joke, and in this video we discussed some truly terrifying and obscure mental health conditions.